Greetings and Nadi viewers. I'm very happy to have with me our guest today, Tristan Driessens. Very happy to have him with us. I'm sure we have a very unique experience to share today.
Thank you, Fadl. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah.
Very pleased.
So this is, I think you are very familiar with Nadi, and I think we should start in the first interview as usual with the biography, the beginnings, how it's all started about music.
Sure, sure. So yes, let me introduce myself in a few sentences. So my name is Tristan Driessens. This is the Flemish way to pronounce my way. I'm a Belgian-born, actually Flemish-born oud player. And I started off music when I was still a teenager because my family was already involved with music, but mostly classical music. My mother was a pianist, not a professional pianist, but a music aficionado. She was playing piano on a daily basis. So we were like, in a way, immersed and involved with music from an early age. And so I started my training, let's say, as a teenager, in as many kids in Europe and in Flanders, by taking solfeggio lessons in the local music school and piano lessons. But it wasn't quite my mission or my call in that time to become a piano player. So I was an average piano student. I wasn't really motivated. But then things changed a little bit when my mother, who is a very important person in my life, so I might mention my mother every once in a while during this interview. My mother, she decided at a certain point to start leading a kind of a nomadic life. When I was 13 years old, with the family, we started to travel, to spend our daily life mostly traveling during the whole year and through a certain specific part of Europe, which is Belgium, the Netherlands, and especially France, Spain, and Portugal. So it allowed us to meet with different kind of people, to learn languages, and it was for me also the starting point to be involved with music in a different way. So quite spontaneously, I took up the guitar. My sister Lara, who is also a singer now, she played in that time the flute, all kinds of flutes, Celtic flutes, Irish flutes, and we started very naturally to play concerts just for us, for the people that we met. And I was playing the guitar, mainly chord progressions, and my sister the flute. But still, during all those years, in between 13 year and 19 year, it wasn't still my destination to become a guitarist and to go become an Irish session musician, for example. No, I was still like searching, and it was only until I um, encountered, in a way, in an indirect way, the Sephardic music tradition, whom I've come to know during some travels in Spain, the Andalusian music, that I really became more closely interested in the instrument the oud, very specifically. Um, Also, something to mention, something that really makes sense to me is that during these travels, I was an
Yeah.
avid reader. I was reading a lot, and one day I came across a book, a compilation of the most beautiful parts or the most accessible parts of the Mesnevi, the Masnavi of Rumi, and I started just reading it without having any background, any idea even what Sufism was all about or where Rumi was coming from, what did he represent. So I was just reading it, and it really became something very familiar. I was very attracted to his poetry and his mystical poetry, his philosophy. So I think it must have been my very first encounter with the culture and later on the music that I would dedicate myself to a few years later. And so yeah, it was only when I really discovered the oud that I knew that I would dedicate myself to it for I don't know, the rest of my life is maybe a bit exaggerated, but at least for decades to come. And that was when I was 18 years old. 18, 19 years old, I discovered the oud. I was back in Belgium in that time after 5 years of traveling, and I met with a Moroccan scholar from Rabat. His name was, and still is, by the way, Azus El Khouri. And he was the one that first, in a very first stage, was teaching me the makam, the world of makam, and also alongside the necessary oud techniques to develop in order to play this music. So this is like in
Yeah,
a few sentences, mainly the musical background.
yeah,
That
interesting. That's a very quick tour
Yeah,
into
it's a
history.
very quick
Yeah, but
synopsis, very quick
we
tour.
need
I
to go
can,
on details. Actually,
of
we
course.
need to go. For example, here I could see one observation that the way you learn the music is in a family setup or setting, family and maybe like small community. And that was
Yes.
not maybe systematic, right? Was it something coming from school or any sort of systematic learning, or what kind of learning was it?
Um,
Early stages. Yeah.
in my early teens, it was as many people, many young teenagers, I went just to the local music academy where once a week I had solfeggio lessons and once a week piano lessons. But actually, to be honest with you, I don't really take this education into account. But because nowadays, um, my basics, my education, I mainly had it when I already discovered the oud. So of course, it helped me to yeah to read scores. Of course, I learned to read scores when I was like a teenager. But apart from these 4 years that I was just going to the academy to learn music, but without a very deep motivation, I think the traveling years brought to me the flame of expressing myself through the music more than anything else. Because, for example, my father, he himself is not a musician. He's an aficionado. He knows a lot about music, especially jazz and also world music. He was the one to give me my first vinyl when I announced him that I would become an oud player. He
Mm.
told me, okay, I give you my blessings. It's going to be a long ride to become an oud player. And if you can play as good as this man, I see your task as accomplished. And he gave me a vinyl of Munir Bashir. So he was already
Uh-huh.
listening to this kind of music before I even discovered the oud or Arabic music in general. So my father was
Mm.
somebody with a very huge cultural knowledge about music and the arts, but he himself was not a musician. He was a writer. He's still a poet, actually. He was writing articles
Mm.
about the poetry of Antwerp, because we are originally from Antwerp in the northern part of Belgium. He was
Mm.
always very supportive, but he didn't really transmit to me the music itself. He was just
Mm.
very supportive when I decided to become a musician. And it was only through the traveling years that slowly I started to figure out that there was a
Mm.
way, a path in front of me, especially
Mm.
filled with music, rather than poetry or writing or painting or anything else. I
Okay.
don't know if this is a specific answer to your question. I
Yeah,
can
actually, I could see here this is an experience of polymath where you were exposed to many things. And these
also,
many
yes,
things were all just normal stuff like music, poetry, math, physics, whatever you were
yes,
studying at school. So that did not trigger anything. It was just a normal thing.
yes,
Then
yes.
came the encounter of that music that made you believe and say, "Oh, this is my destiny. I'd like to go that way for the rest of my life," as you just have mentioned.
Hopefully, yes. You never know.
So, what is it? I mean, can you describe the moment? What is it exactly that made this kind of music special to you?
Well, as I usually or sometimes say to people who ask me that question, so it was a choice that was not based on any knowledge that I already had. It was also
Mm,
a choice that was very much based on intuition. I
mm,
have to say, and it might sound a bit odd, I was not specifically in love with the oud. I was not specifically in love with Arabic music because my first training was actually Arabic training. So first with this
mm,
Moroccan teacher, then later on an Iraqi teacher. I just felt, without having any very specific explanation, that this is what I wanted to dedicate myself to. So
mm,
when I first discovered the oud, like physically, when my teacher, Azus El Houri, in that time,
mm.
brought from Rabat my first oud, like a student oud, very humble oud. I took the oud and I was like, I don't want to start playing yet. I just want to make a tour first go to concerts, go to the local library to take as many CDs as I could get to just discover all the wood players. So I was in the
Mm.
beginning mostly listening. I remember that the wood was on a sheepskin somewhere in a corner of my house. I was watching it, but I didn't even dare to start touching it because I was like, I have to first have an idea about what is what can I expect, what is the path that I'm going to follow in the following year. So I remember the first
Mhm.
year, I was hardly ever playing, but I was going to concerts, and I can name you the first oud players that I was listening to very deeply. It was actually in the first place Adel Salame, which
Mm.
eventually became a good friend of mine. Adel
Mm.
Salami from Palestine, he had a very nice, deep sound and a very beautiful, percussive way of playing. And so I remember my first concert that I watched him play with Adel Shamsuddin, the percussion
Mm.
player that also
Yeah.
eventually became a friend of mine. And so
Mm.
I went through the discography that was available in my country because in that time I was not really yet familiar to YouTube. I don't think it even existed in that time.
Which year?
So it was like in the year 2000, or I was 2001. Maybe it
Okay.
already existed, but I didn't have it. I didn't
Very
have
early
all these
stages. Very
media
early
yet.
stages.
So I discovered Muni Bashir. I also listened a lot, very intensively to a lesser known oud player from Algeria, from Bekaa, which is a part of Algeria close to Morocco. His name is Allah. They call him Allah, Allah, Abdelaziz.
Mm.
And so I was just orienting myself. And it was only after 6, 7 months that I called my teacher, Azus El Houri, and that I told him, okay, I'm ready now. If you accept me, I will come on a weekly basis to your house and try to be a good student.
Yeah.
So just to go back to the initial question, it was a very it didn't feel like a very close culture to me. I really had to get used to it before I
Mm.
started actually playing. Because what I didn't mention is that my first very important reference as a musician was folk music, actually, and it still is. I'm still surrounded
Mm.
by folk musician friends who sometimes ask me to play with them too. So I was very, very much involved with the Belgian folk scene, which is quite something to be proud of.
Mm. Yeah.
French folk music, Irish folk music, Swedish. So this was my very first love, actually. And believe it
Mm.
or not, but in the very first stages of my oud playing, I even played also these types of music.
Yeah.
Before I really profiled myself as a professional oud player, I was also playing Swedish music, for example, on the oud or dance music from Belgium. So, and I'm still
Mm.
proud of it because, of course, my main reference now is my education that I had in Istanbul, thanks to my masters who are living there in
Mm.
the first place, Nejati Çelik. But it's still something that I want to cherish and nourish. The fact that folk music also gave me a good basis, both in
Yeah.
my playing abilities, but also in my taste, in the styles of music that I really like. Yeah.
Mhm. At this stage, were you already finished with the like university degree, or what was that stage?
Actually, in that stage, so when
Mm.
I knew that there was going to be a very great effort that I was going to pay in order to become an oud player, I was about to start my studies, my university studies. And in
Mm.
that time, there was no education possible for example, to achieve a master's in Arabic or Turkish oud. It was not possible.
Mm.
Nowadays, for example, not so far from where I live
Mm.
in Holland, in the neighboring country, you have, for example, in Kodart, a department for Turkish music, which was, by the
Mhm.
way, founded by another very important person in my life, Kutsi Erguner.
Mhm.
But in that time, there was nothing around. So I thought, let me just try to continue learning, and in the same time, I will make a bachelor and master degree in musicology. So I decided
Mm.
to go through a whole course of musicology, first 3 years of bachelor and eventually 2 years of master in the Free
Mm.
University of Brussels. And so it was also during those 5 years that I could dedicate myself to oud playing, study, and eventually I'm very happy that I did this musicology studies because the very last year of this master degree, I dedicated like almost a full year to write my thesis, my master thesis. It
Mm.
allowed me to settle down in Istanbul for a year,
Mm.
almost a year, and to really get very close to my main teacher, Necati Çelik, to make a thesis about Taksim, about makam. So even though I thought
Interesting.
for a while that it was a little bit
Mm.
sometimes a waste of time to dedicate 5 years of my life to a musicology degree, in the end, it all turned out well because it allowed me also to have access to to certain education. Because you have to know what I actually figured out is that when you come to Istanbul as a
Mm.
student and they know that you're also a musicology student and researcher, they like this. They
Mm.
feel sympathy for this.
Mhm.
So I found myself transcribing taxims, for example, on scores, like the way a Western scholar would do that. And it was
Mm.
maybe not the most efficient shortcut, but it was eventually a very good move because it allowed me to really deeply analyze the music that I was
Mm.
exposed to in Istanbul. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we will hit into this again, but you did the bachelor, you did the master's, and yet
Yes.
another master's, right?
So I first did the bachelor of 3 years, and then, of course, naturally, I went on in the same establishment, the same university, to do a master, which was like
Mm.
the continuity of the bachelor. Because in
Yeah.
that university, it's one of the few universities in Belgium where you can do the full package, like bachelor and master in musicology.
Mm.
Unfortunately, there was no such thing as an ethnomusicology department in that
Mm.
university. So I had to go through the whole classical music history of the West.
Mm.
And then later on, when I was already graduated as a master in musicology, I I did another master in a different establishment in Belgium, in the Flemish part, in what was called in that time the Lemmens Institute, which is an equivalent of the Royal Conservatory of Belgium.
Mm.
And in the
Mm.
Lemmens Institute, in that time, the director he wanted to open up the range of educational possibilities in his establishment, and he wanted to do what Kodaks did actually to also propose, for example, Turkish oud or accordion or bagpipes or hurdy-gurdy.
Mm.
I don't know if it worked out, but in any case, I was lucky enough to be yeah a, a Turkish oud student in a Flemish
Mm.
conservatory, which is a very strange story, of course. So I had another master in Turkish oud, but I have to be really honest, I didn't learn to play there. I learned everything in Istanbul because very often, as much as I could, I visited my master in Istanbul, and practically he taught everything to me. So I learned everything really in Istanbul. But on paper, I have a master degree in Belgium. So later on, the director of this establishment, he asked me to continue. He proposed me to start teaching in the conservatory of Lemmens Institute.
Mm.
And I had a few students here and there already in that time. But actually, I decided that I don't want to promote the learning of of a tradition that is so much based on oral transmission within the
Mm.
walls of an establishment, of an institution.
Mm.
I thought it would be a paradox, especially because I come from a very face-to-face education. So I didn't learn the Turkish
Mm.
oud in İTÜ or in another establishment in Istanbul, even though these universities are extremely high profile and very, very good. But I really
Yeah.
learned it the old way. Just being in the very small office of Necati Çelik, they call it the mesh system. He's showing me something, he gives me his oud, I'm trying to
Mm.
repeat it. It's just by slow assimilation. So
Mm.
this is the way I learned music, and it is not
Mm.
specifically based on any method. Very often, my
Interesting.
master would tell me, "Listen, Tristan, my son, I'm not really a teacher. I just give you the spirit, but
Mm.
you can go home and practice. You know what to do. But if you get
Yeah.
the spirit of makam, of the culture, then the way will reveal itself to you." And
Mm.
nowadays, I'm also teaching. I became a teacher, even though it's not my main activity. But every Tuesday, I'm fully dedicated to my students. and I'm just teaching the way I received the same music. I don't have any written method. I'm trying to adapt myself to the students. You may call it a good way or not, but it's the way that I was taught. So I just transmit the same way.
Interesting.
So I'm very much defending
And
and
that is
promoting also the respect, the deep respect of oral transmission more than
interesting. And
anything
that
else.
is in person, not online in any form. It's in person.
Actually,
Yeah.
I do recognize the wide range of advantages that online courses give because we can learn in quality teachings online in a very easy way. So I'm not against it. I like it,
Mm.
but in a way, it didn't work out for me. So, for example, during the lockdown, I put all
Mm.
my lessons on hold, and I like the physical contact. I like the yeah
Interesting.
the rituals, like meeting, taking some time, maybe
Yeah.
offering a cup of tea to my students of some water, and then start and take the time. So this is the way
It's the
I
mesh
like
culture. Mesh
a
culture.
little bit like the mesh culture, even though I would
Interesting.
not call myself a representative of the mesh culture at all, but it was the way that
Yeah.
worked fine for
خلاص,
me.
you are infected. You are infected.
I'm infected.
Let
There's no
me
way
just
back.
let me come back to a very important point, which is the education system in Belgium.
Yes.
Now, the case that you had a different kind of life where you moved from one place to another, you were
Yes.
traveling, like what you call it, nomadic travels,
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
right? And you were experiencing a lot of people, cultures, musics, whatever.
Yes.
At the same time, this system allowed you to just jump and start your BS degree and then carry on your master's degrees. This is a
Exactly.
great thing, really. Great thing to highlight that is out there, and maybe just give us some highlight on such unique system. Then we move back to
The
music.
unique system of being able
This, like,
to
you don't
learn.
have to attend, isn't it? You don't have to attend. You don't have to be in one place. Your education
So
system is so flexible, isn't it?
the education system in Europe,
Mm.
I think it's very good actually. You know, in reference to what we just said, I'm not trying to believe in a fairy tale that the only way to learn music or to learn anything is from a master, like a living legend, an established musician, for example, like in the case that I had the joy to experience with Nejati Çelik. I'm not trying to say that this is the only way, or it sounds like a fairy tale. It's very beautiful, but of course the educational system in Europe, and I think especially in a country like Belgium, who is like a crossroads where a lot of cultures can also merge. It's also a very cosmopolitan
Mm.
society because I was living for 15 years in Brussels. It's a meeting point between a lot of cultures. We have a lot of communities very well represented there, from the Turkish to the Arabic, the Iranian, the Italian, the Greek. So um, I think that the range of possibilities is very high in the educational system. To give you an example, I'm quite close to a world music academy in Brussels. It's called Musique Publique, and since a couple of years, no, since a long time actually, like I think at least 15, 20 years, they're having one of the biggest world music academies of Europe.
Mhm.
So they have many teachers. I cannot say exactly how much, but maybe 50, 60 different kinds of instruments you can learn. They have hundreds of students. You can learn Arabic oud to Armenian duduk to kora from Senegal.
Mm.
You can learn about makam. There's makam theory lessons.
Mhm.
You can learn about flamenco guitar, cajon. So in a country like Belgium, a city like Brussels, there is a lot of access to any other
Mhm.
extra European culture as far as the music is concerned. So I'm very happy to witness this. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think a
even
teenager or
yeah,
yeah,
even like the public education system is also very good because it's very flexible, isn't it? because
Well,
you can just approach the BS degree, do a test, and then continue your studies, or switch to vocational or whatever. I think you have a lot of good system in there, isn't it?
I think so. I think so. To be honest, I'm not very much. I don't know exactly now. Cannot really. I don't feel myself in a position that I can evaluate or even judge the educational system. What I can say is that I'm affected by the fact that I didn't go to school for a couple of years, whereas I was supposed to go to school legally. Even though in that
Yes.
time, when I was 13 years old, Belgium was one of the few countries in Europe where you don't have to go to school. It's not compulsory. You have to learn. There is an inspection. You have to follow an official program, but going physically to school was not compulsory in that time. I don't know how is it now.
Mhm.
Um, so I was quite affected by the fact not to go to school because I realized that, to my humble opinion, school can also be sometimes like a waste of time. I'm not against school. I'm not an anarchist, but if
Yeah.
I evaluate the range or the number of things that I could learn while I was away from school, in between my 13th and 18 years old, it was during that time that I learned English, for example, and French and Spanish. So as far as languages are concerned, I learned music. I could learn many other things also and be in contact with people. Socially, I
Mhm.
developed more skills, I think, than I would have developed in school. So I'm not the best conversation partner when it comes to really um, say that school is the best the best
Yeah, but
option for everybody.
I mean,
Yes.
this you have experience. You were an example of somebody that the system in there did not reject you. It gives a chance. You know, in other places, in other countries, it wouldn't. And
Yes,
really,
for
it's
sure.
really great that you have shed light on what has been learned outside the system and within the system. That's
Exactly,
really
exactly.
great, really great.
Yes,
And I'd like,
I can only
mm,
repeat that the fact that I did this decision to achieve a master degree in musicology,
mm,
it helped me a lot, a great deal to find my way, to navigate my way through this culture that was far away from me in the beginning, the
yeah,
makam music, the Arabic Turkish system. So it's true that even though I learned the music through oral transmission in the first place, I can say that in the same time, simultaneously, the fact that I was like framed in a way by an institution, it also helped me a lot. So
mhm.
it was a fortunate combination of both approaches, let's say. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting, interesting. Let's go back to the timeline where you
yeah,
encountered the Arabic music and you said,
yes,
"Yes, this is what I need."
yes,
So let's take it from your maybe first encounter. And I noticed that you said you left the oud for 7 months to maybe comprehend and understand
yes,
instead of just rushing and I don't know,
yes,
maybe distracting the pure self that has been attracted by that music.
yes,
Some
yes.
people will do so, right? This is really a very interesting thing that you have highlighted. Let's see how the learning process went through with like names and places and your experience with every stage.
Yes.
Mm.
So I can give you a brief overview of all the teachers that I had and how I moved gradually from, yeah, like classical Arabic playing in the first place, thanks to this Moroccan teacher who was taking as a reference the
Mhm.
Egyptian way of oud
Mhm.
playing with masters such as the Sultan of the Oud, Farid Atrash, and people we all know. So this first encounter was with Azus El Houri. It was a very short but very important stage of my learning process. The very first
Mhm.
weeks and months that I had the task to comprehend every week a new makam. So
Mhm.
his habit was quite quite quick to
Mhm.
explain me one makam per week. And so he
Mhm.
gave me a short exercise, like a short say exercise, a piece, dulap, as we say, an introduction of every makam. So, but even though he was taking as his reference the Egyptian way, he was mostly a representative of the Andalusian school. He was from
Mm.
Rabat himself, but he was very close to the culture of Fez. So when he played for me, I could hear a lot of Andalusian flavors. And I have to
Mhm.
say that the first music that I really listened to, next to Adel Salame, Mouni Bashir, and the other oud players that I already mentioned, was the Andalusian music. Because it
Mhm.
also made sense to me because in a way, it reminded me of the years that I spent in Spain, the flavor of
Mhm.
this music, the Andalusian music, um, which was already present in the south of Spain since Ziryep settled there in the 8th century in Cordoba, as we all know, this is history. So, but
Yeah.
quite quickly, I was in search of new teachers. So my second teacher, I remember, because Azus El-Houri was also very open. He wouldn't claim me as his student. He
Mhm.
would in a certain way, which is very normal. But he would
Mhm.
also tell me, spread your wings and go around and meet different teachers if you feel like. So I wasn't obliged to be only faithfully following him because he knew also that I was in a stage of orientation. I had to go around and discover everything. So my second teacher for also a short while was Anwar Aboudrach.
Okay.
Anwar Abdullah is an Iraqi singer, Jose player. Jose is the Iraqi equivalent of the Kemenche, of the
Yeah.
Iranian Kemenche type.
Mhm.
So he also was my teacher for a while. And the reason why I mentioned Anwar Abdullah is because he was the one that introduced me to Hudetsi, to the Labyrinth musical workshop scene. So
Mhm.
I'm thankful for him for that. It was a very short time, the time that I spent with him, because he was not really an oud player. He was mostly a singer, violin player, joza player, a very skilled musician. But as far as the oud was concerned, I was in search of more techniques, more abilities to
Mhm.
develop. So one day he told me, Tristan, I'm going to Crete.
Mhm.
And I said, why Crete? He said, because in Crete there is this movement which they call Labyrinth Musical Workshop. It was the first time I ever heard about it back in 2006. And
Mhm.
I'm going to see my best friend, Nasir Shama. Nasir Shama was presented by Anwar Abdelrach as his best friend, and he was
Mhm.
going to attend the seminar as an oud student in a very humble
Mhm.
way. So he said, I would like to invite you to come with me. We'll take the plane together, and I think it's going to be a very nice experience for you to spend a full week practicing 6 hours of oud playing per week per day with Nasir Shama. And of course, I knew already Nasir Shama because I had collected a discography of solo oud playing through the years, so I knew who he was, and I was very much excited to meet him. So I remember the first time in my life I took the plane, by the way, was to Labyrinth Musical Workshop, to Heraklion.
Mhm.
And the person next to me was Anwar Abdrak. So I'm very happy for that experience because it was, in fact, uh, hugely thanks to Labyrinth Musical Workshop that I eventually found my destination, which was a few years later, the Turkish Ottoman music.
Mhm.
Um, so I went to this seminar of Nasir Shama in the summer of 2006. I met many people, fellow oud students, so it was very rich and a very great experience for me. And later on, a few months later, I ended up being a student in the Beit el Oud, the House of the Oud, in the center, the historical center of Cairo,
Mhm.
where I was a student of Nasir Shama for a couple of months, like just a
Mhm.
few months after my encounter with him in Labyrinth Musical Workshop. But there still, I was very dedicated. Nasir Shama, he would always give speeches that if you don't practice 7 to 8 hours per day, there's no hope. He was exaggerating and really trying to push very hard his students, which I think was a very good method, of course. So I was
Mhm.
actually practicing a lot when I was in Cairo. I didn't even have time to visit the historical monuments of Cairo in the first month that I was there. So I just went on a daily basis to the Beit El Aoud next to Al Azhar in
Mhm.
this place in very important place in Cairo. But I have to say that in that time I was still searching, and still felt in a way that I didn't reach my destination. I felt like a foreigner. I felt like this
Mm,
Flemish guy that tries to tries to get
mm,
familiar with the culture. I learned a lot, especially technically, but it is only 1 year later when I went back to the Labyrinth Musical Workshop in the summer of 2008 in Lefkada in that time for a
yeah.
workshop with Yurdal Tokcan, where it was a shock in a very
Mm,
positive sense, of course, like a revelation. I came
mm,
there with my Arabic roots, and the way he presented both the woods with these very specific left hand techniques that he developed so much, the chakma, as he know, as he explains
mm,
it, and the way he developed very clearly in a very lucid way the makam system with tetrachords and pentachords and the differentiation between the makams. It all became very clear to me, and from one day to another, literally, I said to
mm,
myself, I'm now going to follow the road of Ottoman music. It was a shock. So
mm.
immediately after this experience, I kind of sold also the two or three Arabic ouds that I had, and I bought Turkish ouds because immediately
Mm,
after I ended up in Vienna, where there was in that time a center called Makam Hane, the House of Makam, which was
yeah.
very much represented also by Ömer Ekdorlar, the ney player who was invited there all the time, together with Necati Çelik. And it was my roommate in Lefkada, Pepe Frana, who in that time he was just starting off to it, even though he was already very talented. He told me,
Mm,
you might be interested in having a look in what's going on in the Makam Hane, because there is Necati Çelik, and he's an old classical master and very important representative of the classical way of learning the oud. So he suggested me to go there, and since Vienna is just 1 hour and a half flying from my country, I went to Vienna a few months after my encounter with Yurdal Tokcan, and I can say that it all began there because Necati Çelik, he told me, come to Istanbul. Now you spend just 3 days in Makam Hani. I can give you some information, but it's nothing compared with what I can give you if you take the effort to come to Istanbul and to visit my office more than just a weekend. And I remember a quote. I remember him saying to me, "I think your mission is to come to Istanbul." But I was not a avid traveler in that time. I didn't
mm,
like to take the plane so often. So I told him, uh, "Master, I'm definitely going to consider taking a flight to Istanbul and saving time to go there." And he said to me with a very huge smile, like, okay, keep considering for a while, but I know that you will come very soon to Istanbul. And he was right, because very
yeah.
soon after, I was in the stage that I had to start doing my research for my master thesis. And in a very natural way, I ended up spending almost a year with some breaks here and there in the office of Necati Çelik, and I made my thesis with him as the main reference. And this was
Mm,
actually yes, the moment where it took off, where I felt
mm,
like, okay, now I'm in the right place with the right masters surrounding me. There was Necati Çelik, but there was also Kutsi Erguner already in that time who helped me as a mentor to fulfill my work for my thesis. And there was
mm,
also Yurdal Tokcan, whom I continued uh, visiting in Hudetsi, especially to
mm,
attend to seminars in the Labyrinth Musical Workshop. So in that time it took off.
mm,
I found the necessary tools to really continue fulfill my
mhm.
education. Yes.
Okay, so how did it feel like the first time that you said, okay, now I leave my fears and doubts. It seems that it's going to be working. Was it the time you met Yurdal, or what's the moment exactly that you started to seeing it triggering and kicking?
Yes. Well, I have to say, unless I forgot this, but though I was not really in doubt, or I was not really in fear. maybe there's some moments of fear that I don't, I mean, I remember many moments of fear later on when I was supposed to play Taksim on the stage, and it was like sacred moment when you play a Taksim not in the right way. It's like, like
Yeah.
as if you break a sacred space. So later on,
Mhm.
when I was already a professional musician, there was fear every once in a while. But in that learning process, I remember even before I met Jurdal, I would go to any oud player I saw playing on stage. I would go backstage to meet him and ask him whether he would teach me or not. So I was very avid to learning.
Mhm.
I was very like thirsty to learn
Mhm.
things. So when I met Jurdal, I just felt that it was much more clear. Without judging anything, I felt that I had this impression or um, that the way Ottoman music is preserved, it was much more precise than the way Arabic music was transmitted to me. Um, there is also this comma system, the system that is much more precise than the fact that there are 24 equal quarter tones per octave, which was the
Mhm.
way the Arabic teacher would present to me the
Yeah.
microtonal system of makam. With Yurdal, it became clear to me that Turkish music, in a way, was much more preserved. And I think
Mhm.
historically, there are moments in the recent history of Turkey that might emphasize what I just said, because when the Republic, for example, was founded by Atatürk in 1922,
Mhm.
immediately after he created or he made sure there was a department in the conservatories dedicated exclusively to Ottoman music, and he asked the foremost musicologists and musicians of that time, like Arel and others, to establish a Turkish music theory.
Mhm.
Whereas, according to my research in that time, Arabic music in that time has been very much exposed to the will to fit in the Western music. There has been, as we all know, this very famous or infamous Cairo Congress in 1932, where one of the main topics or one of the main challenges was to try to find an answer to the question, how can we fit the Arabic music into the Western system in order to build up fancy and prestigious orchestras, in order to build up an orchestra of Arabic musicians, like as if we have a symphony with a director, with a conductor. Of course, this was prestige. This was like trying to compete with the West. So the simple fact that they established in 1932 a system according to which the octave, for example, is divided in 24 equal quarter tones, me and many other people, I think it's a mistake, because even nowadays, when you listen to Arabic music and when you listen to Arabic musicians that explain the music, they all say that, okay, it's on paper. On paper, it might sound relevant to say there are 24 um, equal quarter tones, but everybody knows that in practice, this quarter tone is a bit slower, it's a bit higher. So there's been a huge conflict between what was established in theory and what was played and practiced in the musical musician scene. And I
Mhm.
had the feeling that in Turkish music it was a bit, the conflict is less high, even though there is a conflict, because the RL system is also an approach that is not so appropriate. Actually, it's a slightly inappropriate approach of what is going on in practice. The fact that Ariel said that let's establish 9 commas per tone, all these things, and let's establish or let's invent a makam that is the perfect equivalent of the major tonality, the major mode. Like, for example,
Mhm.
as you know, Ariel, he established a new makam, charga, which was
Mhm.
supposed to, yeah, to represent actually the major mode. So all this is still theory, but I think this theory is getting a bit closer to what practice is all about, to what the music is all about.
Yeah.
But for me as a Western musician, I could feel that I had a much more easy access to the world of Makam through the study of Ottoman music. That was
Mhm.
for sure. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. Also,
And
when I ended up in Istanbul, I felt that I was less a foreigner. I felt that the community was much more eager to welcome me and to support me in my search of
mhm.
being, yeah, a
Yeah,
musician. Yes.
interesting. And I could see, the speed of light jumps of weeks, recognizing things in few weeks, taking an opportunity, jumping from one stage to another, till you finally found yourself with the stage of Yurdal and the Najati and Hutsi
Yes.
and your visits to Istanbul and Labyrinth from time to time. Now, for the intervals,
Yes.
like you have mentioned, how the Arab teachers usually convey the message of the 14 semitones, which is not
Yes.
even there in the books of 1932, right?
Yes.
But this is, as you said, the way they convey it, the way they confuse themselves and others about most of them, basically. But the intervals, your encounter to the intervals, and your way of like managing or maybe mastering these intervals in the way they are, either for Arabs or Ottoman musicians, or let's
Yes.
say Turk musicians. How did you manage to make sure you are accurate in understanding,
Yes.
memorizing the intervals, and also the nuances, the grammar of that music?
Exactly.
Yeah, was it recognized from the early stages? Was it a difficulty?
Actually, it was by times difficult, but I think that nothing is impossible as soon as you're ready to expose yourself to a culture.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't really believe that much that you have to be born in a certain culture in order to represent it, or at least in a decent
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
express it. Of course, it's true to a certain extent, but I think it's a matter of time. I think the matter of time, the
Mhm.
parameter of time is very important because I think as much as you can learn a new language uh, through slow assimilation, it goes the same with music. If you dedicate enough time being exposed to the music, I mean, in my case, listening to music, um, it will in the end be part of yourself. And in that time,
Mhm.
when it is part of yourself, you cannot do anything wrong.
Mhm.
When the culture that you want to receive, that you want to um, that you're interested in, is part of yourself, even if it's just a part of it, everything that is within yourself cannot be something wrong. So I
Mhm.
remember, as far as I'm concerned, spending years in the office of Nejati Çelik, just listening to him playing taksim or playing peşrefs or semais or anything, or singing or talking, even talking Turkish. I remember sometimes
Mhm.
being very interested in listening to a conversation that was held in a language that I didn't have a clue what he was saying, just because the music of the language was something that inspired me, or it put me at ease. It had a
Mhm.
calming effect on me because I was in love with this music and with this teacher and with the wood and with the sounds and with everything um, that is this culture is about. I was actually a very passive learner in the first years of my education, of my actual education in Istanbul. I
Yeah.
remember I didn't play that so much, actually. The percentage of time that I played daily in the office of Necati
Mhm.
Çelik was quite small. Most of the time, I was just listening very passively, in
Mhm.
an extremely passive way, listening and absorbing the music. And sometimes I would say, or I would question myself, is this the right way? I would not always be aware of the fact that is a very rich way of learning. Because sometimes I didn't
Mhm.
realize that while listening over and over again to, to the same taxims, the same makams, the same pieces, I was not always aware that it was a very good way, it was a very good basis. But this was really the reality for me. And sometimes I would play all of a sudden, and my master would say, Güzel, good. sometimes I wouldn't play
Interesting.
for months actually. And the thing is that sometimes today when I take up a new piece, when I learn a new piece, when I play a new piece because it's part of the repertoire of a concert, I play it as if I already know it. And sometimes it's for the first time that I play it because it is a piece that I've listened to so many hundreds of times that it's just part of myself. And it gives me the
Mhm.
feeling that the way I play it now, thanks to all this ocean of time that I dedicated just being passively around when the music was played, it made me feel very confident. It's something that is within me. And I repeat, it's just a fraction because, of course, there's a huge part of this repertoire that I don't know. For example, due to the simple fact that I don't master the language so much. I can follow a very simple Turkish conversation, for example, but the simple fact that I don't fluently talk Turkish is something that doesn't give me access to a whole lot of cultural features, of course, of this music. But this is something that I really always highlight and emphasis very much when students ask me what to do. I tell them,
Mhm.
please develop the love and the time for this music by listening to it and develop a passion for listening because it is an oral transmission. You cannot learn it on scores. I mean, it's impossible. You cannot even you cannot even learn it through a very intensive 8 day or 6 day masterclass in Labyrinth Musical Workshop. This is something that is necessary to orient and to
Mhm.
give you the access and to give you the necessary work. But the real way, the real way, in my opinion, is just to develop uh, ears that are in love with what you listen
Mhm.
to and for a long time. Yeah.
Interesting. So you observe and you record and digest and all sorts of,
Yes.
yeah.
Absorbing, like a child
Mm.
is absorbing the culture of his parents and the languages. It's
Mm.
very important to absorb, to assimilate, and
Mm.
preferably as slow as possible, I think, without being in a hurry. I think
Mm.
patience, sabır, is a very
Patience. Yeah.
important feature as a musician. Don't be in a hurry. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, with your journey among these teachers and masters and places, did you have any objective saying, okay, I need maybe to learn more Bashrafs, more onto Taksim, more of this, more of that? Were there any objectives, or it was naturally flowing as it should be, or as it went, whatever?
Yes, I realized because, for example, we talked or we mentioned, for example, how did you overcome your fears? And it's true
Yeah,
that I figured out that Taksim was something else. It was something that I couldn't learn in a few months or even in a few years.
yeah.
Um, for me, Taksim is the quintessence. If you can express yourself uh, through 3 minutes of Taksim in a given makam,
Mhm,
in a way that everybody says this is what a makam should sound like, that is a huge achievement. And I realized that
mhm,
it was not while studying for a short time a makam that I could play taksim. Taksim is like it requires abilities on many levels. It
mhm,
requires, of course, the necessary knowledge of how the makam is supposed to be built up. It requires also the necessary technical abilities on the instrument, any instrument. You cannot just play without having mastery of your instrument. You need to show, to highlight
mhm,
also what you're capable of doing. So to answer your question, I realized that it is only by playing a lot of material written in a certain makam that I could eventually take the sentences, the cheshni, the motifs. They call it
mhm,
cheshnis, like small melodies that are helping you
mhm,
to build up a taksim. And these cheshnis, these melodies, this collection of melodies that you have to assimilate also slowly comes by playing repertoire. So the very first stage is playing as much repertoire as you possibly are capable of playing. So not
mhm,
just one samai or one peshrif for any makam, but dozens vocal repertoire, any repertoire available for any makam. And only when you know how to play the pieces, I think as a necessary next or as a logical next step, you can um, evolve as a person to play taksim. Taksim is a genre, and it's a genre that
Mhm.
comes after
Yeah,
um, playing all the repertoire. Yeah. Mhm.
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, was the learning process like a random jigsaw puzzle solution? For example, in terms of pieces that you were learning, for example, repertoire pieces, makams that you are covering, usuls, technique, for
Yes.
example, was it randomly being fit and by time it was closing holes in the jigsaw puzzle? Or it was going in a progressive manner? What was it like for your own experience?
In my experience, I don't know if this is the proper answer to your question, but in my experience, the repertoire gave me the guideline. For example, if I needed to develop technical skills, if I was, for example, into developing left hand techniques or right hand techniques, sometimes it's enough to take one strophe of one sentence of a repertoire, of a samai, or even a peshrif, even the slowest piece, and you
Mm,
can get started with it. The repertoire gives me
mm,
always access to what I need. So even
mm.
technically, or for the rhythm also, because of course, as you know, the usul system is the other pillar of this
Yeah,
huge institution of Ottoman music. It's not only makam, it's also the rhythm. So
yeah.
I found during years in both um, repertoire the necessary windows that I had to open up to become more experienced in both makam and rhythm. And I remember that sometimes I would just focus for a full day or for hours on just one small sentence of a repertoire or of a teslim of one of a samai, and repeating it, playing it in many different ways in order to develop the style that we call heterophony. Just not
Mm,
just playing the notes, but try to be creative with a small sentence coming from a given piece.
mm. Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if it is a question, but if this is an answer, but your question made me want to tell
Yeah,
this
actually,
as an
yeah,
answer.
because the way you learned with many people, different stages, and the Ottoman repertoire is so big. It's very
Yeah,
organized
it's
corpus, but I
yes.
don't think you went to every maqam and maybe you had the chance to have it seen from your master, like
No, no, no,
everything,
no.
Shak, everything on Asfahan, everything, that
No, no, no, no.
usul, that technique, that's my
Yes,
question.
yes, yes.
How did it come all together to close the holes in a jigsaw puzzle for yourself?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, in the first place, I don't think there is such a teacher that has it all in terms of the number of maqams. So every teacher has
Yeah.
his favorites amongst the maqams that are existing.
Preferences. Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
teacher, every musician, I mean, whether he's a teacher or not, he can express himself to better or worse in certain maqams. I mean, maqams are also feelings. So they represent things. So I can say that, for example, through certain stages of my learning process, I was attracted more to certain maqams as to others, and it's the same with teachers. I mean, even though you might say that on paper you have in between 350 and 500 different maqams differentiated from each other, it's not such a thing in practice. I mean, I think without knowing exactly, let's say that there are more or less 30, 35 maqams that are coming back every once in a while when being in front of one specific teacher. One of my
Mhm.
masters, like Nejati Çelik, for example, let's say that his makam, the one that he spontaneously is playing when you ask him to play, is Ushak or Hijaz or Chef Kefsa, like a
Mhm.
few makams, or Huzam
Mhm.
also. Um, so, but it brings me to another point that I believe that it's not necessary to know all the makams. I
Mhm.
believe, let's say that if we can use a metaphor that makam is like an ocean, so something
Mhm.
huge, you can never
Mhm.
know the whole ocean. Or let's
Yeah.
say makam is like a forest. Let's say it's like a
Mhm.
forest. You can never know all the trees that are in a forest. It's useless to just try to count them. But if you know one tree very well, if you know one makam, this is the metaphor, very well, if you have the feeling, or if you come to a stage that you know most of the secrets of one only makam, one single makam, it gives you access to all other makams, because all makams are related. A makam is like a neighborhood in a city. If you know
Mhm.
very well the neighborhood in the city, but you know the culture of the city, you know the way people speak in the city, because people come and go. They come to the neighborhood, they go back. There is no such thing as a neighborhood in a city where people never leave the neighborhood. It's the same with makam. Um, things come and go. For example, if you play ushak, you're supposed to play different makams too. You're supposed to know what is Husseini all about, and even what is Karjar all about. You're supposed to know Rast also, because it's inevitable. There's certain stages in the Mayam, in ways of developing a makam through taksim or through playing pieces, that bring you inevitably to all the other makams. Not all of them, but many of
Mhm.
them. So one makam gives you access eventually, after a long stage, to the logic, to the spirit of all other makams. So that's
Mhm.
why I don't think you are an accomplished musician only when you know all the makams. It's not impossible. It's the same for Persian music, and it's absolutely the same for raga. The raga system is
Yeah.
even much more wide.
Mm.
And I checked this conviction of mine while talking with a great friend of mine who also is a very great sarod player in classical Indian music. His name is Asad Kizilbash, and I'm very much influenced also by him, inspired by his playing. I had the chance to work with him, and he says he could confirm what I said. It's true, he says, if you know one raga very well,
Mm.
you're on the way to really know what classical Indian music is about. So it's the
Mhm.
same. It's very equivalent in Makam system too.
Interesting.
Mm.
Interesting. And where's the score? Where was the score and the music notation in these stages?
Yes.
Where was the best use of it?
So the score, as we all know, I guess, the score is a shortcut. Sometimes it's a reminder. Sometimes, but it's never the real thing in the Makam music, which I was to which I was exposed. So
Mhm.
um, when I would learn a new piece,
Mhm.
in the way my master wanted me to learn things, he would very first say, okay, look to the left side of this score. What do you see? I said, usul, which is the rhythm. It would be written always in modern notation system. He said, okay, what is written there? Semai, aksak semai, which is 10/8. For example, aksak semai, it can be Devri Kebir, Devri Hindi, it can be Muhammad, any other usul, but I take aksak semai as the example. Okay, then now let's play aksak semai. And the way to play or to learn any usul is to beat them with your right and left hand on your right and left knee. So we would in the very beginning, we would just get familiar with the usul.
Mhm.
And when that was done, he would say, okay, now let's sing. Let's sing the score, even though it was an instrumental piece like a Pesherev or a Sasemaisi, and even though I was not a
Mhm.
singer. So everybody should be willing to sing what he's supposed to eventually play on his instrument. And this is a very important issue, not an issue, but a very important feature of this music. So you first sing in order to feel through your body, through the breath and the voice, the intervals, because the voice is a much more reliable tool to learn the intervals, because they can reproduce what you hear much more directly than any other instrument, especially not the oud, because the oud is not considered a very appropriate instrument to imitate the voice. Unlike the ney, for example, or even the kemenche, they're very much closer to the voice. So before even starting to play the score, we would clap our hands, and sing.
Mhm.
And after this second stage, we would play the score, but we would only play the score after listening to the music. So the master would first play the music, and he would tell you okay, now that we have access to YouTube and to all the discography and to Spotify, you can also listen to the version that was played by this master and that master. Don't listen only to oud examples. Listen to how Niazi Saïd on the ney, for example, plays this. Listen to how
Mhm.
Nejet Yashar plays it on the tambour. It is also important not to just focus on how is a certain music played on the oud,
Yeah.
by the simple fact that it's my instrument. And then I would memorize the piece as much as I would I would be able of. And that's where the point of reminder is coming in, is that after memorizing the piece roughly or more completely, then you would read the score, but already by knowing the piece actually.
Mhm.
So the first stage is to know the intervals by singing, to know the usul by clapping on your body, and to memorize the piece. So that I
Yeah.
think that is the most solid way of learning music.
Interesting.
If you want the music to evolve from within,
Interesting.
that's the most appropriate way, I think,
Yeah.
for any music that is transmitted until our generation in an oral way. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and
Yeah.
nowadays also the score is a very nice tool. It's very
Mhm.
good to have them. But as we all know, a score doesn't give any access to the styles, the tower, the soul of the music. It doesn't give any access to the microtonal logic because we have all these signs that were invented by Arel in order to give a
Mhm.
clue about which are the intervals that are part of
Yeah.
makam. But for
Mhm.
example, just for the Sega perde, the Sega interval, we have so many possibilities, and Sega is placed in so many different ways according to the makam, and even within the makam, according
Mhm.
to the ascending or descending movement of the melody, a perde like Sega is played differently, and not only Sega, also different intervals in the scale. So a
Mhm.
score doesn't give any information about how
Yeah.
movable perdes are supposed to be played. And more importantly, a score doesn't give any information about how music is supposed to be ornamented. And
Mhm.
ornamentation is an absolutely necessary feature of this music.
Mhm.
If you play a piece, it is as if you are in a church or in a monument. You cannot imagine anything without the beauty of ornamentation. You cannot imagine uh, classical or traditional architecture in the Arab or Turkish world without ornamentation. So if you don't know how to ornament the music, you don't get the clue. And all this is
Yeah.
absolutely not uh,
Mhm.
featured or represented by a score. So that's why I say the score can be a shortcut. For example, if you have some memory loss, if you have to
Mhm.
remind things, you can have a quick look to the score because, of course, it's not easy to learn these very
Yeah.
long melodic horizontal lines, and it's not easy, yeah, to memorize them in a short time. So you can have a close look and a quick look, but most of the material should be memorized by listening in order
Mhm.
to have the complete picture of it.
Interesting. Tristan,
Yeah.
I think a very relative topic that we need to touch on, discussing this part and the learning process that you have described very well already in a very amazing way, is practice. How
Yes.
was the experience of practice back then during these stages? And how is it, how do you practice today? Talking about
Yes.
this particular music, yes.
Practice is always a very
Mm,
problematic aspect. I almost say it is
yeah.
necessary. You know, it's like cleaning yourself. You have to practice. I mean, and
Mm,
you have to practice in every stage of your musicianship, also in every
yeah.
stage of your age. I think
Mm,
a truly accomplished musician, I mean, the musicians that I truly admire or that are my heroes, let's say, or my model, are musicians, call it a
mm,
coincidence or not, that keep on practicing. They
mm,
never take anything for granted. They're constantly driven by the need to explore more things or to deepen more things through practice. So I
mm.
think a musician that comes to a stage where he doesn't practice at all anymore, he might question himself about the value of his musicianship. So practice is very important, but of course, I didn't answer yet how I practiced.
Mhm.
I remember that my let's say my practice ethics, I could develop
Mhm.
them a little bit through my very first very deep experience with oud practicing in Beit El Oud with Nasser Shama.
Mhm.
Yeah, Nasser Shama, he's only talking about practice.
Mhm.
He wants everybody to be practicing as much as he could because his aim in his life, his goal in his life as a teacher, is to create as many virtuoso oud players as possible. So when you go
Mhm.
out of these establishments after 2 years, the Beit El Oud, you are a virtuoso because people practice so much. So he creates practical practice ethics. Um,
Mhm.
I was practicing in the beginning thanks to the masters that were following me up. So I could practice thanks to the fact that I was seeing on a regular basis my master. So I would feel ashamed to show up in my master's office and to tell him, "Oh, sorry, master, I didn't practice." I mean, it felt like a lack of respect just to
Mhm.
tell this to someone who is dedicated to give his time in order to transmit such a noble thing as music. So I think if you have a good relationship with your masters or with your teachers, whatever the circumstance might be, I think practice comes naturally. You have to practice in order to show your masters and teachers that you are interested in receiving his
Mhm.
education. Um, of course, this is still very vague because
Mhm.
what is practice all about? I think I believe that there is not just one way of practicing. I remember now just spontaneously talking one day with Tarchiarchis. I don't know if you had his Tarchiarchis in your series of interviews. He's a very accomplished Greek oud player, even a virtuoso. He was very close to Ross
Mhm.
Daly also, and he managed to develop a very particular style. You cannot call it Turkish or Greek or Arabic or Iranian. It's like a very beautiful resume of many different
Mhm.
styles. It works very well also for this for the music that he's playing. And I remember meeting Takiakis. We don't know each other so well, but we had a few small conversations here and there in Hudetsi. I remember meeting him and meeting him again 1 year later. And as by miracle, in the span of 1 year, he just became a virtuoso. He became a very technical and very solid wood player. So I asked him, Tarchiakis, can you explain me how you managed in 1 year to become such a impressive wood player?
Yeah.
He said, yeah, I spent 1 year, or I spent much of my time in Hudetsi, and I was just practicing like 4 hours or 3 hours. I don't remember exactly how many hours. 3 hours left hand technique, 3 hours right hand exercises. And then I would go and play with people at night or in the evening, so it would be the moment to play just the wood, not think about dissociation of right and left hand. So some people are very disciplined
Mhm.
in really practicing in a very methodic and disciplined way, and I admire these people very much. And as a logic solution, I mean, as a logic thing, they become virtuosos. I have to admit that I've never been a very, very avid practitioner. I practiced a lot of repertoire, but I didn't practice like 5 hours per day over years and years, left hand, right hand. I would do it like gradually. Sometimes, for example, after a masterclass with Yurda Tokjan, I realized how much it's important to develop left hand virtuosity or right hand. Um, so, yeah. But what I can say very specifically, as far as the oud is concerned, there is always this struggle between right and left hand. And
Mhm.
I see, for example, in my practice over the years, I realized that for me, for example, the left hand is kind of the servant of the right hand. The right hand is the
Mhm.
most difficult one. It's the most difficult hand that needs much support. So the left hand is the humble servant. the left hand is doing all the work. The right
Mm-hmm.
hand has the limitations. If you want to do a very, very fast piece like a longa or a piece that when you play it with musicians with in a taverna, for example, they would not wait for you. They wouldn't say, okay, now let's take it more easy in order for this oud player to follow us. No, no, no. You have to catch up, you have to follow. So since the right hand, I think it's something you can say in general, for oud playing is by far the most difficult hand. You're you're trying to manage all the time through very acrobatic movements of the left hand to support the right hand because you have to be ready when you're on
Mm-hmm.
stage or when you're even rehearsing with other musicians
Mm-hmm.
to catch up and to follow in speed and virtuosity sometimes. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something that I am aware of, that I have to uh,
Mm-hmm.
take into consideration that my right hand needs support of my left hand. So very often when I practice, it's the left hand that finds solutions in order to for the right hand
Mm-hmm.
to be able to play anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but
interesting.
nowadays, practice for me is very much related to the concerts that I have. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's the most ideal situation because I think practice should be something completely independent of how many concerts you have. But
Mm-hmm.
in certain stages through life, where you have to deal with many other things that sometimes are threatening the music, I
Yes.
mean, administration work, traveling, problems, things you have to deal with in your daily life as a human being. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
once again, you don't have to believe in fairy tales that everything is there just for the music to be evolving. So very often it can help to me to just know, okay, in 3 weeks I have this concert with these musicians and we're going to play this repertoire and there are a few pieces that I'm not completely sure of, that I will master them 100%. Whereas I know that if you're on stage, you should master the music that you represent for 100%. So let me practice now this and this and this piece. So the
Mm-hmm.
concerts very often give me the direction. But still, in an ideal situation, I believe that a musician should practice daily, completely independently of what his professional stage life looks like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A
So,
musician should consider it even like a spiritual exercise to say, okay, now, even if it's just 5 minutes or 15 minutes or preferably a little bit more, like half an hour, to just say, okay, there is nothing else now than practice. This is the ideal
mm,
situation. Some people manage very well, and call it a coincidence or not, these people are sometimes closer to the feeling of accomplishment as a musician.
interesting.
Yeah.
So it's about competencies, weaknesses, gaps, needs,
Yeah.
be it technical, be it expressive. So
Mhm.
it's driven by what you need now, right? And problem
Yes, and it's
solving.
also driven
Yeah.
by how you present yourself. Are you a
Mm,
career-minded musician, for example?
mm,
If you are very focused on career, you might find a spot or you might find a type of music that people like,
mm,
and a type of music for which practice is not so much needed, for example. But if
mm,
you are a musician, and I dare to say that myself, I'm part of that category of musicians. My ambition as a musician is not to have the most fancy career you can imagine or to break through the mainstream. I don't think it's even a wise decision or a wise aim to purchase if you're an oud player.
yeah.
Because we are in a niche and we have to be aware of the fact that it's a niche and it's not people that can appeal to the masses. So my
Mm,
ambition, since I present myself as a musician playing Ottoman music and the model music of the East, my ambition is if if I'm considered by my fellow musicians and by the members of the community where I'm actually active or where I'm somehow identified to, if I am considered a good musician or accomplished musician or an
mm,
emerging musician, it's good enough. So it also pushes me to practice because I want to honor also my fellow musicians by being able to play at
mm,
least what they can play when we are in a circumstance where we are sharing a certain repertoire or concert program. So this is
mm,
something that's driving me. it's all about,
Mm,
again, the things that I say to my students. It's all about time also, and love,
mm.
respect for the not only the music, but also respect for the representative, the exponents of this music. And when you
Yeah.
have to deal with them, and when you're in a stage where you're colleagues of these musicians, like in my
Mm,
case, musicians that in a previous stage of my life were sometimes my heroes. Of
mm,
course, um, the musical ethics that you're fulfilled by, they just drive you to try to do the best you can, because you don't want to
mm,
you
mm,
don't want to be yeah
mm.
um,
Interesting.
other than an accomplished musician. So
Mm.
so many things are just helping practice to stay and to
Exactly.
stand in daily life. Yes.
And not to forget the thing you mentioned about being an absorbent, attentive, living the thing, loving the thing, because it's all
Yes.
connected, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my very first teacher, Asus Al-Khoury. I mentioned his name a few times, and I said it myself now a couple of times too. He said in a very solid and a very simple way, okay, you want to learn the oud? I said, yes. Okay, you need three things: a good instrument,
Mm,
love, and time. And
mm.
they're normally connected. If you have love, you will find a way to find a good instrument. You will organize your savings in a way that, okay, let me give some more money to my instrument. And if you have love, you have time. You will manage your life, your time
Mm,
management, just to give some priority to the music. So it was the
mm,
first sentence any oud teacher ever said to me, and it still stands as something that I can
mm.
really underscore, actually. Yeah.
Interesting. Now you have seen several cultural makam music teachers and masters, and maybe people, a lot of people here and there.
Yeah.
Did you see that the practice culture is different from one group to another?
Um,
Do you remember
that's a
anything
very
of the sort, or
that's a
maybe
very
some
nice
observation?
question.
Yeah, especially that you said, for example, the Ottoman music is very precise in terms of the way they specify intervals, ornaments, the way they express whatever. The Arabs maybe focus on other things. You have seen Indian people, Persian people, Greek people.
Yes, yes. Well, I think the way native people from who are born in certain cultures, especially in the
Mm,
East, of course, because I don't know so many other cultures deeply than Eastern cultures, the way
mm,
they deal with their culture, with their legacies, I
mm,
think it's comparable. Yeah.
mhm,
Um, what I could witness and observe is that native musicians, like the
mm,
musicians of the Turkish community that I work with sometimes. I mean, when you go to Istanbul, you have this community of very passionate practitioners of Ottoman music. The way they practice is much more organic, let's say. They
mhm,
play a bit like all the time. I met many people that were born into the music, and they would practice like gradually. They were exposed to the music from their early age on, and
mhm,
they were just like on the way for a long, long time. So I hardly ever heard them telling to me, okay, you should practice like this, and that amount of hours per day. Like just dedicate and spend time with your instrument is pretty much what they say. Just dedicate time,
mhm,
spend time with your instrument, whatever it might be.
mm,
Just spending time with your instrument is going to show you the way anyway. So even outside any method frame. But when I observe Western musicians, non-native musicians that are penetrating these cultures, like for example in the community of people that go to Labyrinth Musical Workshop, I think they would practice more because of course we have to practice more because we have to catch up. We don't
mhm,
have to. We were like people like myself or other names that I can mention. Many of the people that come from the West and that go to, for example, Labyrinth Musical Workshop to learn things, they maybe they feel the urge of practicing more and
mhm,
of taking a lot of shortcuts because they were not born in the culture. Um,
mhm,
so I feel sometimes that. people that have the ambition or the aspiration to
Mhm.
absorb no more than one culture, many
Mhm.
cultures.
Mhm.
They sometimes practice much more and in a
Mhm.
much more disciplined way and in a much more effective way also. Because it brings me
Mhm.
also to the to another observation is that when you're outside or not born in a certain cultural frame, but still nevertheless deeply involved with it,
Mhm.
like people like Ross Daly, for example. I didn't mention Ross Daly up to now, but
Yeah.
um, Ross Daly, he's one of the early examples. He was basically outside of all the cultural cultures that he was exploring very deeply.
Mhm.
So he assimilated many things, even though he was not a Turkish born or an Indian born or an Afghan born musician. But he could also, since he was observing from outside all these cultures, he could also find much more easily the links between these cultures.
Mhm.
Whereas if you are going to Istanbul and if I team up, for example, with very skilled Turkish musicians, very few of them ever went to see what's going on outside their cultural frame. They're mostly representatives from younger or elder generations. They're very often very skilled and very good musicians, but it's very seldom to find native musicians, like in the example that I'm just mentioning, Turkish musicians, for example, that are showing a very deep and a very successful interest in foreign traditions. So it's almost an example, an advantage somehow. It's not only an advantage, but it can be an advantage if you're a Western musician like myself, um, going from outside, approaching the music, um,
Mhm.
to learn it and to also see it in a
Mhm.
more large perspective. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. One last question and we go for a break. And I'll ask
Ah,
you for
yes.
a
Okay.
piece. Yeah,
Yes.
and that last question is related to the observations. If the practice is in this form, right, and we have these varieties, different routines, different concerns for practice or subject of practice, what is it that makes people so precise on their pieces, so expressive, so advanced in carrying a legacy or maybe even new works, like
Yes.
seeing these cultures?
Do you have any examples of musicians in mind when asking this question, or
Yeah,
just I'm curious?
for example, you see the way people render the pieces in certain
Mhm.
region versus other
Mhm.
region. If their practice is this format, is it a pressure that makes certain nations or certain communities more advanced in the way they express or deliver the music?
Uh-huh.
Is it a
What
pressure?
would
Is
you?
it, I don't know. I mean, the way you see it
Interesting.
because you have mingled with them, right?
Yes, yes. Do you mean that, for example, in certain types of music, the music is much more demanding? It requires much more years of practice before being able to play it,
Yeah,
for
like
example?
you can
Yeah.
see, for example, the virtuosic aspect,
Yes.
the taking care of the exact melody, respecting the melody, respecting, for example, in the Ottoman music, we respect the details of the piece. Even
Mhm.
if we go and introduce new things in the piece, there are rules, there are like ethics, there are certain things that you should respect, right? Same thing
Yes.
for the Persian music, but the Arabs are more flexible, right,
Yes.
and more easy and tolerant about changing, maybe over improvising, right? Even the way they
Yes.
deal with
I think the
makams,
Arabic
and
musicians are
so
maybe
on.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I can say, just this last part of the question, is that Arabic
Mm.
musicians, they seem to be, it's also my observation, sometimes more flexible, more open-minded. It's like a more, not in a negative way, but a little bit more loose, the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, the rules are less
Tolerant.
strict. Yes,
Very
more
tolerant.
tolerant. That's a better approach, more tolerant.
Yeah.
I think it's mainly and very simply also because of the geographic territory that hosts all these cultures. I mean, through the media, of course, Arabic culture is spread. For example, I've been in Morocco a lot of times for concerts, and I see that for them, the Egyptian music is not something strange. I mean, it's part of their culture too. And if you are a Moroccan oud player, of course, you come across sooner or later the great Egyptian oud players like Abdel Wahab or Riyata Sumbati or Farid Atrash, for example, you know. Or you come across inevitably the great Iraqi oud players like Jamil and Munir Bashir. So it is all part of their culture, even though they're thousands and thousands of kilometers away from Iraq. I mean, I am not
Mm.
so close with Finnish music or with
Mhm.
northern Swedish music, but it's the same distance that, for example, in Morocco and certain parts of the Arabic world. Um,
Mm.
so the unification of the Arabic culture makes it's a much larger territory than the Persian music. It's also very
Mhm.
large, but less than Arabic music. I have to say that I like Arabic music a lot, actually. I even think
Mhm.
that they sometimes, in certain circumstances, have a much more appropriate and much more strong expressiveness than than for example, the Ottoman music.
Mhm.
Recently, I was a part of a very beautiful project where the aim was to connect or to see what the common playing ground was between 19th century Ottoman music and the Andalusian music from Fez, which is a very
Mhm.
beautiful, bright, and old tradition. So I figured out through an exchange program of masterclasses between Brussels and the Conservatory of Mohamed Brouwer in Fez, we figured out that there's a lot of affinities and sympathy between the Fassel style, like the 19th century very lively way of playing Turkish music, and the nowadays the culture of of the Andalusian music, the Nuba.
Mhm.
So we
Yeah.
decided to build up a project between the orchestra of Andalusian music of Fez, directed by Mohamed Breuel, and the Turkish music. And so that's why, for example, I approached Kutsi Erguner, who is I'm very close to, and by the way, he took it over. So because he's much more representative of Turkish music as I am, but eventually we recorded and we um, made a concert where these two traditions are put together. And we realized, or I realized, and for myself, I'm very sure of this observation, is that Ottoman music is a little bit more like an institution. I mean, if you play it for the people around, it's not very obvious that people are knowing the whole repertoire. I mean, people not don't necessarily know who was Tambur Cemil Bey, even though he's one of the main composers of Ottoman music in the latest stages of Ottoman music. People that don't necessarily know him. It's not so much part of collectiveness. So,
Mhm.
for example, the Arabic music, which is also a classical tradition, and it's in terms of complexity and largeness of repertoire, it's we can say it's equivalent. It's on a foot of equal quality compared to the Ottoman music. But when we were in Fez and when people were playing this very complex music with so much love of transmission to bring it to the audiences, everybody was clapping, everybody was going crazy, everybody was singing the repertoire. So it was part of it was calling something that was in the people, in the collective way of perceiving music in people, and that's also what gives to the musicians in a way an enhanced expressiveness. I think the
Mhm.
way the tie or the relation or the connection with the public is established. So the public is partly responsible for the way music is played in a more or less expressive way. And I would say that music that is only there because of institutionalization, because of the fact that conservatories, institutions exist for the music to survive, I'm not sure whether these kind of music have a very deep expressiveness. So I think the audiences and the way the music lives in the public, even in the
Yeah.
illiterate people, people that don't know anything about makam or people who cannot even explain what the music is all about, but just listen to it. It's a very beautiful and very important, significant value also for
Yeah.
the musicians, for the legacies to survive and to be transmitted from generation to generation. Um, and also one other thing I want to state, it's just something that comes up to my mind because a few days ago I was talking with a fellow musician from Iran, musician from Tehran. Sometimes when music is not institutionalized at all, or when music is not supported at all, people have to fight in order for their music to survive. Like we might say, maybe it's the case in Iran. I don't know exactly, but it's a feeling, it's an intuition. And when I listen to my friend, Iranian guitar player, Shahab Azimeri is his name, by the way. I was in his house a few days ago. He says that, yeah, maybe the fact that music is not supported by the government, or you don't get a salary if you're a musician
Yeah.
in these countries, for example. But still people have to fight. And so maybe there is there's this urge, this
Responsibility or
yeah,
yeah,
this responsibility. Maybe it affects
defense.
also the way they play it. But I don't know, because I think it's a very, very curious thing that when you go to Iran, when you listen to Iranian musicians, the degree of virtuosity they all have, it's something astounding. It's astonishing
Yeah.
how high the level is of an average musician being part of the community of Iranian classical musicians, for example. It's something quite astonishing.
Yeah.
Um, I remember also, and maybe this is going to be the last part of this answer before we make a break, if you want. I remember my
Yeah.
teacher, one of my teachers, Yurdal Tokcan, going to Iran for the first time. So I don't know, one decade or a few years ago, he was invited in Tehran to give oud lessons. And he told me afterwards, I met him in the airport, and we were spending some days together. He told me, Tristan, you know, you've been to Hudetsi so many times. We're doing a great job. I managed to transmit the techniques of wood playing to the Greek people and all the people that go to Hudetsi, and they take it over. And I'm very proud of all of you. But I went to Iran, and it's something else entirely, he said. People are very, very uh, quick in absorbing many things. They just assimilate very easily all the ornaments, all the things. Why is all this? It's a mystery, but maybe might be
Yeah.
related to things, institutionalization, government support, yes or no. They
Yeah.
might affect the way musics are transmitted. That's it.
Yeah. This is a question to our friends, Masters and Nadi, who we
Also,
invited. Or yeah. So remember this discussion, guys. So
yes.
Tristan, I think let's select a taksim of yours.
Aha,
One
okay.
of the recording of the taksim you select for us, and let's
Okay.
listen to it for a break.
Since you asked me to send a Taksim, I just released an album that I'm quite proud of with my fellow musicians. Michalis Kouloum on the violin and Miriam Encinas on the percussion. And one of these pieces, a few pieces are improvisations. My Ushak Isfahan Taksim that I recorded for this album. I will send it to you in a while.
Sure. Thank you very much. Actually, congrats on the album to all of you, and we'll
Thank you.
listen to it.
Thank you.
Tristan, thank you very much. Actually, we enjoyed the Taksim, and we will, go into that a bit later. But
Yes.
actually, let's maybe talk about the way we perceive such music and such journey by listening to others, as you have emphasized. It's more into listening to others and trying to, as you say, passively absorb and digest and assimilate,
Yes.
isn't it?
Exactly.
This is maybe a trait that every one of us should have at all
Yes.
stages.
Yes.
Mm,
It's true.
mm,
So yeah, as we said in the beginning of the interview,
mm,
the with emphasis on slowness and
mm,
letting the time um, reveal itself also, because there is a time for everything. Sometimes you just need to wait for the moment
mm,
to fulfill something. It's not something you can force or you can choose yourself. To a certain extent, of course, yes, but not uh, in the full range. It also
mm,
brings me to another question that I would like to just emphasize in a few words about. In the beginning of the interview, you asked me about, of course, we spoke a lot about how I eventually came
mm,
into this music, how I approached it, how I could get access to it, how I took up the oud, for example,
mm,
given the fact that I came from a completely different frame, a different education, mainly inspired by folk music legacies and traditions, who are very
mhm.
present in the life that I had, like folk music from our countries also.
Yeah.
So it's something that I want to add. The reason why I came across the oud and eventually the masters and the countries where I could
Mm,
go more deeply into this field of Ottoman music in particular. It's also, although it might sound a bit like a fairy tale, but I don't think it is. It's you can choose your destiny, of course, but it's
mhm,
sometimes destiny partly chooses you also. Sometimes it's also
mhm,
important not to question too much. Why did I end up being an oud player and being the musician that I am now? Because sometimes it's a matter of following a call or
mm,
yeah, destiny that is not entirely in your hand. It is
mhm,
partly, because once destiny reveals itself, you just have to go for it, because then you're given a
mm,
responsibility to fulfill destiny. But
mhm,
it's a thought that comes to my mind very often when people ask me, but why the oud? You don't have parents, right? That
mhm,
are from there or that showed you the way. It's the fact that I was meandering and zigzagging in several parts of the world that were
mhm,
part of a destiny that finally picked me up somewhere
mhm.
somehow.
Yeah.
Like, and it's also, it's also the encounters or the deepness and value of certain meetings and encounters, the human
Mm,
ties that are there that also push a musician to go in certain directions. It's not just basic interest or fascination or intellectual curiosity. It is part of it, of course, but not only. It's not the only
mhm.
driving force that pushes you in a certain direction uh, in whatever field it might be, I think, especially in the
Yeah.
arts, of course. Yes.
Mhm. And
Mm.
the fact that a learner should be humble and listening.
Also, I think
To,
humbleness is one of the
yeah.
main keywords and
Mm,
main features that give you access to anything.
mm,
If you take things for granted before even started to go the
mm,
slow way in a very humble way, I think you might not have access to many of the important
mhm,
features of a tradition. I mean, I think it's important to to stay humble and
mhm,
preferably in all stages of your
mm.
life as a musician. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's important. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I feel very often like in awe or humbled by the musicians I play with. I am always there to learn something, and I'm there to learn.
Mhm.
That's actually one of the main things. Of course, I am there to express, and I'm there to fulfill a connection with the audiences when I'm on stage, for example, because that is also a profession. But my communication and my exchanges with fellow musicians is very much also based on
Mhm.
this idea that I can learn from them, and that I
Yeah.
am not in a position where I can say to them, I know everything. I'm not an arrogant person. I should not be. I hope I will never be, by the way. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
state of
And
mind. You need the right state of mind in order to continue progressing and advancing, evolving
mhm.
the
Yeah,
chosen field. Yeah.
yeah. And I think if we don't become humble and listening to whatever types of experiences we see, we
Yeah.
can't learn because we just stop it, right? Just
Yes,
stop it.
it slows you down if you start taking things for granted and saying, okay, if you're too easy and too fast in in in imposing an analysis, or saying, okay, now I think I understood this is that and this is this. No, I think the secrets of a tradition are very deep, and you can always dig further and go on. I mean, it makes me think of a quote that I ever learned
Mm.
from an Uzbek troubadour, an Uzbek ashik,
Mm.
as they call him.
Yeah.
At the end of his life, he was one of the most legendary and accomplished musicians in that time. And at the end of his life, he said to his
Mhm.
yeah, fellow people and his relatives, when he was dying, actually, at a very
Mhm.
advanced age. Maybe it was a joke, but he was saying, "Oh, it's a pity that I have to die, because only now I had the feeling that I could grasp the essence of what it is all about."
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's a
Mhm.
mhm.
And I think it applies also even to the records, listening to the records, to whatever repertoire that is recorded out there, not
Yes,
only people
yes,
and masters and teachers or maybe colleagues and fellow people,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It
yes,
applies to
yes,
also.
yes,
Mhm.
yes. As we told before, it's important
Mm.
to be surrounded by recordings, of course. I mean,
Mhm.
especially in my field, we had the great fortune that, specifically in the case of Ottoman music, it has been recorded from the very early stages of recording history on. Like,
Mhm.
it's quite an exceptional situation, but from the end of the 19th century, I think it was 1896 or 1894, in Istanbul, people started recording the music. And it's, for example, a bit later on, there was Tamburi Cemil Bey, who had most of our recording career.
Mhm.
We find a great deal of recordings
Yeah.
of Tamburi Cemil Bey, who are still, of course, accessible today. Everybody can have access to them. They're
Yeah.
even on all
Interesting.
digital platforms now. So
Mhm.
this is it's a great treasure that we have to be aware of. That, of
Yeah.
course, we never know how the music was played, or how the music from the earlier stages of the history of Ottoman music is supposed to be played. Like, for example, the music of Kantemir, or even the music of the early sultans, the 18th, 19th century. But we can get some clues by listening to the first available recordings. So
Mhm.
we're actually quite lucky, people who are
Yeah.
specifically interested in Arabic music too. I think it was recorded from a very early stage on. It's not the case of many other traditions. So sometimes we have to guess
Yes, and go
how.
for writings and descriptions and whatever it
Yes, and
is.
we have to, yeah,
Yeah.
have theses and suppositions about how music was supposed to be expressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Tristan, how about the oud methods and the books that are written for maybe students to learn from? How was your exposure to them and how do you see them useful
Yes.
in the way
So
you saw the experience? Yeah.
my first method that was presented to me uh, by the second oud teacher that I had, and whose name I mentioned already, Anwar Abu Drak from Iraq, from
Hmm.
Baghdad. was the method of Jamil Bashir.
Mm.
Jamil Bashir, he wrote a method like handwriting scores in
Mm.
Arabic, of course.
Yeah.
So when I was close to my second oud teacher for not such a long time, but enough to go through a great deal of this method, I actually, without really knowing it, I went already through some of the masterpieces of Ottoman music, who are also played in Arabic music. For example, like Nihawan Semai of Mesut Cemil or Tasyos Efendi. Many great Turkish composers are found their way also in classical Arabic music culture. So
Yeah.
for me, being able to play these pieces through the method of Jamil Bashir was very useful. Also,
Mm.
Muni Bashir pieces, I was very happy.
Mm.
Then I met one day another oud player in Turkey when I was part of the first international Yorgo Bacanos Oud Festival of Istanbul
Mm.
2010. I was given the task by Nejati Çelik, who was mainly the main organizer of this festival, to record the whole festival. In
Mhm.
2010, I was not still a musicology student, but I just had my fulfilled my master degree. So in a quite naive way, Nejati Çelik, he told me, okay, you're a musicologist, so you know how to record. I didn't know, but I learned just enough to be able to record all the oud performances that were played throughout the whole week of this oud festival in 2010. It was during the year that Istanbul was the cultural capital of Europe. So the Ministry of Culture had the necessary funds in order to make this oud festival happen. And
Mhm.
so later on, I was in the house of one of the participants, one of the oud masters that was invited in this festival. Nuri Özpekel is one of the older oud performers of Istanbul, one of the people from the older
Yeah.
generation. And so
Mhm.
when I was in his house, he gave me the method of Sherif Muhyiddin Targan. We
Mm.
call him in Arabic Sherif Muhyiddin Haidar.
Yeah.
And I think Sherif Muhyiddin Targan is probably an important name to mention also in the history of transmission of this music, because as we know, Sherif Muhyiddin Targan was very important in the establishment of the school of Baghdad, actually. And actually, Munir Bashir was a student also of Sherif Muhyiddin Targan.
And
And
Jamil.
later on, other very important Turkish oud players also came to Baghdad to teach, like Cino Tanritoğlu, who was a master of my master. Um, so I had this method, and I listened a lot to the studies and the caprices, the very technical studies that were composed by Sherif Muhyiddin Targan for students to learn how to play the oud. I've always had the feeling that even though it was very important, and he's a very important figure in the history of the oud, in the recent history of the oud, I've always thought that Sherif Muhyiddin Targan, he adopted a very Western approach to shape his method. Um, Sometimes his etudes, his studies, they look a little bit like caprices of Paganini, for example. Like yeah. Um, so I think it's a way. I think it's a very valuable way to go through these methods, and many people
Mhm.
did that. People I know with very great results. But I don't think it's the only or the necessary way.
Mhm.
It's true that we have to admit and acknowledge that Ottoman music has literally always been balancing on two continents, literally in Istanbul.
Mhm.
Really like the cultural and symbolic separation of East and West, symbolized by the Bosphorus, of course, as you know.
Yeah.
So Ottoman music always had, from the early stages on, being very exposed to a certain degree of westernization.
Mhm.
Even in the history of the sultans who were supposed to be music lovers also, we have many examples of sultans that were themselves very skilled tambour players, for example, or even theoricians. they would
yeah,
almost systematically, through the ages, through the centuries, invite foreign musicians and scholars, musicologists,
mhm,
theorists to take part in the musical life, in the cultural life, and to
mhm,
also help shape this music. For example, we have very famous examples. Maybe the most famous one is Kantemir, who was like a Moldavian prince. He
yeah,
initially didn't have a clue about Ottoman music, but he was invited to the court, and
yeah,
he became a very important theoretician. But he came from abroad also, so there is a it's a very unique example of a culture that has been systematically
mhm,
taking elements and influences from both the East and the West. Also, of course, from
mhm,
Persian culture a lot, from Byzantine culture, from Greek culture, Jewish culture, but also from the West. It's the same with Aliówki, for example, Bobowski, who was,
yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, a Polish slave who
yeah,
eventually became also one of the key figures of this music. And also, of course, it's due to the fact that Ottoman music in certain stages was music that was not supposed to be played by Muslims in certain stages. So they sometimes were obliged to invite to the court non-Muslims like Jewish people or Armenian Christians or
yeah,
Western musicians to take part and
mhm,
to yeah be key figures in the history of Ottoman music. So of course, so it's very obvious and understandable that even in 20th centuries important wood players, because I know most of all the wood players, wood teachers and masters, that they came up with methods that are very much based on Western principles. And I
mhm,
think it's very good, but me myself, to be very honest, I never gone very um, solidly through all these methods. My method was, as I mentioned before, mainly
yeah,
based of on what they call the mesh system, the
yeah,
very simple system of repeating what the master is playing for you, or what the master also think
mhm,
is appropriate for you to learn in certain
yeah,
stages. So with a little bit of caution, I would almost say that I don't believe these methods are absolutely necessary. And I can give you an example. I was once invited to represent Turkey with my ensemble, Lamekan ensemble, in
mhm,
Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan and
mhm,
has a huge history of competitions. They like to organize festivals who are mainly competitions between musicians, and then the musicians go back home with a nice prize. And so we
yeah,
were playing with the Lamekan ensemble a repertoire of karciar, kaçakçılar, which is a very specific genre from the 19th century when the Ottoman music was already migrating to the more popular regions and social regions of Istanbul. So we played like very deeply Turkish music. And then there was one other participant who was also representing Turkey as a performer, solo performer, and he played a few pieces of Sheriff Muhittin Targan, like
mhm,
very impressive pieces with a lot of different positions following up each other in very high speed with a lot of even chords and virtuosity. But unfortunately, the jury panel didn't appreciate that. They wanted to have something that was representing the very soul of the music. They were more
mhm,
interested in makam. And the same, for example, another example, when the late tambour virtuoso Necdet Yaşar
mhm,
met Yehudi Menuhin, one of the main violin masters of the 20th century.
yeah,
Yehudi Menuhin, who was very much interested and very, very, very passionate and humbled also when he was um, being involved with Eastern music traditions. Like, of course, as we all know, his collaborations with Ravi Shankar were very great examples of actually one of the
mhm,
first examples of world music of different cultures from different parts of the world meeting each other. But when in
yeah,
America, Yehudi Menuhin met Necdet Yaşar, whom he admired very much. He asked Necdet Yaşar, please, master, he knew how to talk also to the Eastern masters. He said, Hojam, master, can you play
Mm.
me something that is representative of your culture? And then Nejat Yashar, who was trying to impress this great violin player, he played very, very quick and fast um,
Yes.
arpeggio-like sentences that were supposed
Yeah.
to please a Western listener. But since Yehudi Menuhin was yeah quite deeply involved with Eastern music, and he was in search of certain things, certain magic, a certain expressiveness that Western music is lacking. He said to he didn't show so much uh, interest in what Nejat Yashar was playing. He was not so impressed, and it's also normal because how can you impress such a great virtuoso as a violin player like Yehudi Menuhin? So Nejat Yashar, of course, the genius that he is, he realized that actually, what am I doing? I'm not giving the right example of what my music is really about. So he started to play a very slow taksim, like within a chord, like from
Mm.
duga to neva, like from la to re, just some sentences, some exposition sentences of a makam with some very nice flavors and microtones, very well played, as he could do it more than anybody else in that time, and with
Mm.
some ornaments that are very specifically unique to his
Mm.
tradition. And then Yehudi Menuhin started crying, which is
Yeah.
something very important. So just to say that I don't think learning this music through the technical history of virtuosity that we have in the West since the early 14th century, I'm not necessarily sure that this is an important way to learn the music. Of course,
Mm.
it's very important to master your instrument, but I think every culture has everything from within that gives you the ability to gain mastership of your instrument, and it doesn't go necessarily through Western-minded methods.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Let me ask you one question before we move to teaching,
yeah.
what you teach and how you teach and so on. The last question here is about other model musics that you were exposed to or you are interested in.
Yes.
Mm.
So, as I said before, sometimes by coincidence or due to certain circumstances, you get exposed to different cultures, or call it destiny or not. So, of
Mhm.
course, since I'm active in a very cosmopolitan city, which is Brussels, and Brussels is like a melting pot, a crossroads of cultures. I mean, some people compare Brussels to New York, to other uh,
Mm.
very important capitals. Brussels is a small city, but it's a city where a lot of elements, a lot of influence merge, and a lot of cultures are represented in a very small territory. So inevitably, I developed a very eclectic identity as a musician.
Mm.
So even though I stay very close to my main background, which is my orientation, my background of Ottoman music. This is my
Mm.
luggage, my main education. Of
Yeah.
course, I was exposed to many other musicians from the Arab world in the first place, also Indian musicians who are based in Brussels. So over the years, I developed a very strong interest in, for example, Persian music, Indian music, even though I don't really feel the urge to go that deeply in those cultures than I did in Ottoman music. Um,
Mm.
but I'm also through my travels, because I had the fortune to go to Azerbaijan, as I mentioned, but also to Uzbekistan, where we
Mm.
ended up being in a very similar situation than in Azerbaijan, to be part of a contest where we represented Turkey with Lamekan, and we were supposed to have a prize or not. In Uzbekistan, we
Mhm.
didn't get any prize, by the way, but who cares?
Mm.
But
Yeah.
so I'm very much realizing that when I compose, for example, in the style that we can call contemporary modal music, as
Mm.
Ross Daly himself defined this concept a few decades ago, the contemporary
Yeah.
modal music, it's mainly based on um, navigating freely through more than one, but a multitude of modal traditions. It's not necessary, but it's something that is appreciated and it's possible to do
Mm.
so. So it's part of the very definition of contemporary modal music. So I figured out, I just realized over the course of the last few years when I was composing more than before, that sometimes when I was composing without a specific idea in my
Mhm.
mind beforehand, I realized that some of my compositions were flavored by elements of different cultures that I've been yeah encountering the years before. And I mentioned, for
Mhm.
example, Asad Kizilbash, who is this friend who is a sarod player. For a couple of years, we were both of us part of of an ensemble with 10 persons, and the ensemble was made up of an Iraqi musician, three Syrian musicians, an Indian musician, two Tibetan singers, an Afghani
Mhm.
ashik. So inevitably, during those years that I was touring with them, all these elements they penetrated me in a way.
Mhm.
So they come back or they help me find my rendering in
Mhm.
this type of composition that we call, or type of music that we call contemporary modal music. Uh, it was kind of almost, we can say without exaggeration, invented by Ross Daly. So nowadays, I have sometimes the request or the opportunity to work with musicians from other regions of the Central Asia, of the Middle East. So I try to sometimes actively learn pieces that, for example, are
Mhm.
Persian pieces or Arabic music. Of course, it continues, but I started with Arabic music, so it's, or for example, Indian music or Afghani music. So I ended up being surrounded by musicians who are very far or very advanced
Mhm.
in learning this music. So inevitably, sometimes I'm feeling the urge and the passion to learn a few things
Mhm.
of neighboring cultures besides Ottoman music. For example,
Yeah.
just to give you an example, next year I was given the mission or the opportunity to team up with a great Comanche player from Iran. But since I don't really know so many things about Iranian music, Persian music, even though I was listening to Iranian music a lot, because one of my all-round favorite oud players is from Iran. An oud player
Mhm.
that I've been listening to from the very early stages on is Hossein Behrouzinia. I don't know if you know him. He's based in America. He's
Mhm.
an Iranian, as he calls himself, barbat player, oud player. And
Mhm.
I've been listening very intensely and very intensely to his records. So I
Mhm.
inevitably it comes out of me sometimes when I'm not really
Mhm.
thinking, but just dreaming, daydreaming on my oud. Sometimes, or when I'm um, experimenting with different types of tunings that are maybe
Mhm.
less suitable for Ottoman music. Sometimes things show up all of a sudden. Yeah.
They came up to
And
surface.
now, for example,
Yeah.
as a preparation or in anticipation of working with this Comanche player, I started taking some lessons from an Iranian oud player who is very appreciated nowadays, Yasamin Shah Hosseini. And yeah, so we saw each other online, and she sent me a couple of pieces that I'm now learning, just to be more familiar with this culture. But I will never go very deeply in these cultures because I just consider that I have
Who
enough
knows? Who
with the
knows?
Ottoman music. Who knows? But it doesn't seem like for the moment. Yeah,
Who's that Kamanja player that you will collaborate with?
it's Kayhan Kalor
Oh, okay.
next year. Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, next
Yeah.
year in December we will have a few concerts. I mean, in Belgium sometimes you get a call from an institution. Can
Mm.
you propose or present me a musical program around this or this concept or this themery? And we would like you to team up with this musician. So it happens every once in a while, not very often, but yeah,
Interesting.
it just came on my way spontaneously, and so this is a new challenge of mine to
Mm.
see how we can meet each other. And I'm sure that I will basically stay in my in my reference in Ottoman Taksim, Turkish Taksim. But I would be very happy if I can sometimes respond to him. And of course, it implies for me to have some more deep knowledge of his language. So I'm now starting to. It's a off-road. I start to be a little bit more involved in Persian music, let's say. Yes.
Interesting. Is it possible to get maybe a recording from the Azeri festival? Is there a recording from the Azeri festival? Music? No, the thing, your participation of Lamakan.
Actually, unfortunately, I don't have any recordings.
Or the Uzbekistan?
Actually, neither in Uzbekistan. So in Uzbekistan, we were in a small town, Shahrisabz, who was never really a touristic hotspot in Uzbekistan. I mean, when people from the West go to Uzbekistan, they mainly go to Bukhara or Samarkand. But Shahrisabz was a small town that was completely rebuilt just to host this very huge festival where the president himself was present. But unfortunately, to my knowledge, there is no recording. But I know exactly what we played there, so I can send you the studio recordings of the pieces that we played in Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan.
Wonderful. Maybe it's a good idea to share with our audience some sense of those. Yeah, wonderful.
So what I will send to you is the Karciar Köçekçiler that I mentioned before. On both occasions, both in Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, we played this suite of Köçekçiler because they're very lively pieces, and we thought that these pieces would please also the Uzbek and Azeri audiences. So I will send it to you in a moment.
We'll listen to it then.
eller kınalı, gözler sürmeli. Nerede bulmalı, satın almalı. Belli ah gel sürmeliyim gel. Elem çekme gönül, böyle kalınmaz. Ah, elem çekme gönül, böyle kalınmaz. Ah, tek serin sağ olsun, yar mı bulunmaz. Ah, tek serin sağ olsun, yar mı bulunmaz. Kul oldum kapında, kadri bilinmez. Ah, kul oldum kapında, kadrim bilinmez. Ah, işte gidiyorum, şuradan em kaldı. Ah, karşıki dağlarda bir tanem kaldı.
Yes.
Yeah. So Tristan, teaching. Now that
Teaching.
you have been learning this way, you are believing that this kind of music or musics are learned this way, experienced that way, practiced that way. How do you
Yeah.
teach? What do you teach and how do you teach? Who
Yes.
do you teach?
Yes, exactly. So, to start with the last part of your question, the people I teach, they are
Mm.
of all different ages. The youngest one nowadays is 19 years old. I had a few children in the past, but mainly young adults. And the eldest one is 68 years old. So it's like all ages, and also a lot of different cultures, different nationalities. For example, I have two Algerian students, one Lebanese, a few Turkish students, and a few Italians, and one or two Greeks, and of course a few Belgians too, and one from Luxembourg. So mainly
Mhm.
many nationalities. So this is about who I teach, and
Mhm.
sometimes people who would like to embrace a professional career as a musician, sometimes people who have a musical passion besides a full-time job. It's different kinds of profiles.
Mhm.
Also, one of my students that is coming now for more than 5 years is a bit more old, but he's one of the most disciplined students I know. He's always in time. When, for
Mhm.
example, 1 minute after the time that he's supposed to arrive, he's still not there, I know that there's something wrong, for example, that I did miscommunicate the hour of our meeting. So he's extremely disciplined, and but
Mhm.
he's not very familiar or not very confident to play taksim or play anything outside of reading scores, for example. So
Mhm.
I said from the beginning, okay, just let's read scores. We will find the way anyway, even through scores. So we
Mhm.
are we are playing a lot of scores, and I didn't have any student until now who's playing so much scores, because over the course of 5 years he basically played a new piece every week or every 2 weeks. So it's also a way. And now very slowly we start putting
Mhm.
a more of emphasis on technical things, on what we call in Turkey the tavır, the style, how you are supposed to
Yeah.
play the oud, how you're supposed to make the oud sound in order that it's a real oud, not just playing the notes of the score. So,
Mhm.
and now I feel that he's ready. So sometimes we say, okay, what we will do now, uh, because you asked me for, is something that we cannot do with score. So we just you repeat me, he repeats me, and I feel that after 5 years of just practice through score reading, he's
Mhm.
eventually ready to start making what we call çarpma, left hand ornaments,
Mhm.
or a little bit of taksim, or even just repeating sentences. I play him a very simple sentence, he repeats it. I play a sentence that is a little bit more elaborate, he repeats it. So that is one example of a student. There is another student that, on the other hand, or on the other extreme, is someone
Mhm.
who wants to avoid scores. So I said, okay, no problem. Let's just go by hearing. Take your recording device, and at the end of every course, every lesson, I can dedicate 10 or 15 minutes to synthesize what we've just learned, and just film me. You can make close-ups, you can do anything you want, and then you can practice at home by just listening again
Mhm.
about, yeah, the lesson. So I don't force anybody to submit themselves to any method. And that's what I
Mhm.
said previously. I don't have it. I don't consider myself having any method, actually. I'm just
Yeah.
feeling the confidence to teach because I was asked for. Uh,
Mhm.
People come spontaneously. I never promote myself as a teacher neither. But Necati
Mhm.
Çelik or you, Kutsi Ergunu, for example, they told me, please teach. It's important to teach. It's important to transmit what we've been giving to you. So I see it as a responsibility and as something very important. But I don't try to behave or to do different things than the way my masters were teaching me. And also, furthermore, I'm not really encouraging them to go to an institution, as I said previously. I said, if you have the possibility, the time, and the money to go to the real thing, to Istanbul or to Labyrinth Musical Workshop in the first place, for example, or to any Arabic country, please do. So I emphasis that I can transmit to them several things. I have my small luggage,
Mhm.
but it's still important to be close to the main culture where it all lives.
Mhm.
Because in
Yeah.
Belgium, it's like I'm like mainly someone um, giving water to a rose in the desert. I mean, there is nothing really around me that is part of what I'm teaching. So it's important
Mhm.
to at least once to try to be in the real place where it all began, like in my case, Istanbul.
Mhm.
So what I also do sometimes, in addition to teaching, I created a center, which is I called it Seyir Music, and in this
Mhm.
center, whenever the occasion reveals itself, I host and invite the masters whom everybody agreed on saying the masters. Like we had, for example, recently a masterclass with Yurdal Topcan. So I said to all my students, okay, now you really have to dedicate time and to spend the weekend coming to the master Yurdal Topcan. And so I don't try to represent myself as the only one to is able to teach them. I like it very much when I can invite the masters. For example, next October, my main master, Nejati Çelik, is coming also for 5 days to give some concerts and give some master classes in my space in Say Music. And he's accompanied by Safik Özçimi, one of the greatest ney masters of this moment in Turkey. So and then I urge really my students to be around in a way or another. So yeah, and then also about teaching. So I'm mainly teaching the oud, and also I'm only teaching the Turkish oud. So when people come to me, Arabic students, and they ask me to have lessons with me, in the first place, I want to make sure that they are interested in Ottoman music and in Turkish oud techniques. Because if not, I refer to other teachers that are also active in Brussels and who, according to me, are much more suitable and much more eager to teach Arabic music. So I'm not considering myself a reference or an authority when it comes to teaching Arabic oud. But sometimes, very occasionally, a student really wants to stay with me, even though the student wants to learn Arabic music. So then I go back to my basics that I experienced in Egypt, and I teach them Kulthum or the few pieces that I can share with them. Yes. So and next to the oud lessons, I have also an ensemble class, and we call it very simply the Turkish ensemble. And it's officially a part of my the lessons that I give for Musique Publique, which is this World Music Academy in Brussels that I talked about previously. And there everybody is welcome to join as soon as they play an instrument that is fitting in the instrumentation of Ottoman music. So I have a clarinet player there, a kanun player, a ney player, and a violin player, and some oud players. And there we're mainly talking about 3 different things. Every lesson we do repertoire. So we play pieces, and we play them sometimes over and over again in different keys, in different types of interpreting them. So they're also coming since 5 or 6 years. So we're playing new pieces and old pieces. We try not to forget the old pieces, to just be able to play them whenever we feel like. And then this is the first part of the lesson. Also, the second one is we always talk a little bit about analysis of makam. So, for example, I invite them to form a circle and to play taksim. So I play like exposition. They all play. We play a meyan, like a development. And so we try to get more familiar and confident about taksim playing. And sometimes I also send them in our main WhatsApp group, because it's always very useful, many taksims of players that I know, for example, in the first place, my masters, but also Tamburi Cemil Bey or Niyazi Sayi, Necdet Yaşar, whoever it might be, so they can listen to the taksims and they can compare the taksims of the legendary masters to what we learn in the course, in the lesson. And then this is the second and the third part. So taksim, and related to that, also some theory. Sometimes we just pick up a new makam and we dedicate a full lesson about one specific makam, for example. Yeah.
Interesting.
Actually, there's a third aspect, which is the technique, but this is only for the lessons. For the ensemble lessons, the people that are joining me in this ensemble are supposed to master their instruments. I cannot teach a clarinet player how to put his fingers on the clarinet, so they're supposed to figure out themselves how to play all the ornaments and the technical features of the music that I teach.
Interesting.
So basically, to resume, I'm not following any method. So I can be teaching in very, very different, even opposite ways, according to the person that is next to me. I try to adapt to the student that is there. And I think the opposite way is also very good, because there is a colleague, a fellow oud teacher in Brussels, who is very full of a method. So it's this way and none other way is valuable. And I'm the opposite. I'm just trying to just adapt to the needs of my students. And this is the way. This is
So you
my
like
way.
the facilitation mind. You are a facilitator to your student rather than
Yes, and also I'm a
instructor. Yeah.
facilitator, exactly. And I'm also waiting for the student to show me his interests.
Mhm.
So I'm mainly a teacher from the moment on that I feel that my student is showing the interest that gives me the inspiration to teach them. And there are many, or not many, but a few students that are extremely thirsty and hungry for new things to learn. So sometimes they spend their time uh, filming things and recording things, and they have many questions. So this creates sometimes circumstances where we go far beyond the hour of lesson. So it's not about, okay, 3/4 of an hour, because officially I give 45 minutes of lesson per person every week. But sometimes there is a student that is coming for the next lesson, but the previous student is still there, and I feel that they can explore things and play things together by challenging each other, by being confronted to another student. So sometimes it's very things are being organized in a very spontaneous and organic way. That's always the way I've been teaching since the very beginning in 2008. So it never really changed, and it works very well for a certain category of students. It might work. Sometimes it doesn't work so well for a student that needs a much more specific frame. So they end up finding another teacher. So I mean, it's not my ambition to keep my students with me. Sometimes I have a few students for 2 months, sometimes for 5 years, but I let them come and go as they feel, actually. I don't try to keep them.
And maybe come
Yes.
back later.
Yeah, sometimes they come back later. I have one student now who was my student for 2 or 3 years. Then he moved to France and he came back, and he came back to my lessons. And I organize also like collective lessons sometimes. It's very important for students to meet other students. It gives insight, and it's very productive.
So
Once
they
in a
can
while to
compare.
create a collective. Yeah,
Maybe they
collective.
compare themselves to others. They get a feedback from people other than their
Exactly. It
master.
gives a very productive energy, and it brings me to something that I wanted to emphasize when I was a student in Beit al-Oud. So of course we might say that competition is not something very positive, or not something that is very regarded as a great way of teaching. But the way Nasir Shama created a very productive competition amongst his students helped the students to catch up when, for example, a very talented student, a very advanced student was far beyond in playing many pieces. So he created like a competition um, by presenting as the model, or as by giving more attention to the most advanced students. And I could observe that sometimes a healthy competition, when we don't keep our secrets for ourselves, but when we are in an energy and behavior of sharing, might help the lesser advanced students to learn from the more advanced students. So this is very important. And when I first went to my first seminar with Yurdal Topçan in 2008 in Lefkada, it was the same. He was basically the level of his seminar was basically the level of the most advanced students. At least that was my impression. So the less advanced students, they might not always be able to play what he was asking us to play, but they could record, they could even film. Nobody was against this. So, and they would also be able to make a plan for themselves that, like, in the following 2 or 3 or 4 months, or even the following year, until I come back to a seminar, I know what to do. I have all the material, and which is highly productive and positive in a place like Labyrinth Musical Workshop, is that the students, they would handle over to each other their material, their mini disc recordings in that time.
Yeah.
And they would put everything on a CD, for example, and share it to everybody. So everybody could really know exactly what to do. Because when you spend 6 days, for example, in the case of a regular seminar in Hureci, if when you spend 6 days with a master, even though you're absolutely not um, at the point that you can play what he asks you to play, I mean, eventually and later on, you know what to do when you listen to the recordings, when you start practicing at
Yeah.
home, you have the memory of what you saw, what you heard. So it's very
Yeah.
productive. Yeah.
Interesting. What about students? Maybe share their challenges and advices on the approaches of maybe resolving a problem or advancing themselves.
Yes.
That's also part, I think, of the things that,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if it's relevant, but I had a few students.
Mhm.
For example, I remember a Greek student who was very talented. He
Mhm.
could play very. He was very talented in technique and in advancing
Mhm.
technically on his instrument, but he had an incredible fear of taksim, for example. Whenever I
Mhm.
asked him to play a taksim, he started sweating and he was all white. And so I figured out quite quickly that he had this incredible shyness towards playing a taksim. And eventually he left the course. He left, even though he was very committed, and he became a friend. And he said, Tristan, I'm going to leave the music. I'm going to become a scholar. And he eventually became a very nice and successful ethnomusicologist because
Mhm.
he was too afraid to play on stage, and especially when it was things that, yeah, that are outside the specific things that you can learn. Because taksim, you can learn it, but you have to develop things from within yourself. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So in a few cases, I couldn't overcome with the students certain obstacles or barriers. In a few other cases, I could. It
Mhm.
depends. It depends of the situation of the, yeah.
Interesting. Tristan, I
Yeah.
think the subject of Taksim is a very rich discussion.
Yes, it
And
is. Indeed.
we promise Nadi viewers that we will have another interview dedicated for the experience of Taksim throughout the
Okay,
learning and yeah, with
of course.
our guest, and also
Yes, yes.
the master thesis in that particular subject.
Yes,
Uh,
with pleasure. With pleasure.
yeah,
I'll be back for a second episode whenever you want. Absolutely.
sure, we'll do
That's
it
it.
soon. But let me ask you about maybe the projects in general. We mentioned some, but let's talk about project concerts, collaborations, whatever you
Yes.
are busy with, the albums, the compositions.
Yeah.
Mm.
So my current projects, the project that I have right now, are three main projects, let's say, which is already enough, of course. One of them is now being called Shepherds and Sultans. It's a funny name, but it's also expressing what it means. It is a project in which we present side by side constructed and classical music expressions, like the classical Ottoman music, which was basically an elite musician in the beginning, and also supported and constructed um, even intellectually through scholars who shaped this music.
Mm.
So the more classical, a little bit, yeah, not popular music, and we present this music side by side with sometimes anonymous music traditions from Cyprus. Why Cyprus?
Mm.
Because one of the musicians of this trio is Michalis Kouloumis, who became over
Yeah.
the years one of my closest
Mm.
colleagues, I think.
Mm.
So we like the idea that there has always been a huge influence coming from traditional music traditions or legacies to the classical music of the East. Sometimes I feel that we tend to forget this because people like to build a wall very specific wall between what is classical music supposed to be and what is traditional music. I saw this in Turkey when the community of classical musicians, those who call themselves classical musicians, is not always very in touch with the community of Anatolian traditional musicians, for example, who play the saz and all kinds of Anatolian traditions. I mean, there's a wide range of traditions coming from Anatolia. But we like to say that there has been huge influences of archaic traditions upon the classical Ottoman music. For example, Tamburi Cemil Bey, who is credited to be the composer of a piece called Çeçen Kızı that everybody plays. I mean, in reality, Çeçen Kızı is not a classical piece. I mean, Tamburi Cemil Bey made his version of it, but we can find renderings and versions of this very piece on the island of Lesbos or in different areas and parts of what was the Ottoman Empire previously. And also there is this example of Tamburi Cemil Bey being in a taverna, in a meyhane, and he was very quiet. Nobody really didn't know what he was doing, but he was actually observing very with full of attention. He was observing a Black Sea Kemençe player, how he was playing, how he was dealing technically with his instrument. And he was even making notes, writing small notation, just to know, know more about how music is supposed to be ornamented. So he was really inspired by different ornamentation techniques coming from different areas of Turkey. So with this ensemble, we try to emphasize this point that there is a common root, a common background, actually. And so this is one of the ensembles. So we recorded this album for a Belgian label called Home Records, and the album is called Music for Shepherds and Sultans. And so we are going now on a small tour to Cyprus, and we will continue working together next year. Another project is much more, let's say, based on this contemporary modal music idea. It's a project in which I present myself more as a composer. So I composed mainly all the material, and it's more freely and more loosely based on several traditions from the East. So it's more like trying to create a vocabulary by taking elements from different modal traditions from the East. And this project is named Solman, like Suleiman, Solman. And it is a sextet with musicians from different countries. Like there is Christos Barbas in there. He's playing ney, but also sometimes a bit of piano, and he's singing also. And he was even also collaborating in some compositions. So some of the compositions of this repertoire, we composed them together, which was for me a very nice experience sometimes to compose together with other fellow musicians a piece. And there is also another musician from Belgium. His name is Nathan Daams. He's playing the ney also, and a cello player, and then two percussion players from Turkey and from Italy. So this is another project. And then the third one is actually a project that was started from the repertoire of early music from Flanders. So it's very specific to the music from my area, from the country where I was born, the historical music of my country. And so it brings me more into the early music, but we try to build ties and bridges between early music played on an Eastern instrumentation. So I play, for example, with the oud, old ballads, old songs from Flanders, for example, and we have also santoor or even Indian instruments. So we're basically exploring, fortunate links that may exist between Eastern music and more folk and early music from Belgium. So this is basically, these are the three main projects.
Interesting.
And of course, I have several trios, several combinations of musicians that we play with occasionally. I play occasionally with other musicians according to the circumstances that are presented to me.
Yeah, so that will head into concerts related to albums or other projects, contests, requests. Yeah,
Yeah, there are many projects. Like, for example, I have one project with two musicians that I know since a long time. Actually, musicians that I was growing with together. Like one of them is a percussion player that I know since now I think 12 or 13 years. His name is Robert Kiekens, and his way, his musical path is actually quite similar than mine. He also ended up
mm,
being a student of some great masters of the East, like Zohar Fresco on the bendir, or Fahrettin Yarkin, who is a very skilled and very masterful Rik and bendir player from Istanbul.
yeah,
Um, so I was working and evolving, learning with him side by side by doing projects together. And there is this another musician that I mentioned already, Nathan Dams, who since a couple of years is very eager to learn as much as he can about the makam music on the ney. So occasionally we come together to play concerts and to play small concerts, and it's just an occasion for us to refresh our knowledge. And but we don't necessarily feel the urge of making an album or or or breaking through as an important and successful act. It's just like smaller occasional concerts. And I consider these occasions also to be important. It's not only about the more established projects for which we recorded albums and everything. Both are important actually. The established ones and also the more occasional ones. And to conclude with my ensembles, since I was graduated as a wood player in 2011, a little bit later on in 2011, I created an ensemble. The name was Lamekan Ensemble, and it was
yeah,
with this ensemble that I went to Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, and that we had the opportunity to record and play many times in Istanbul and in Belgium, basically. And we were always mentored and surrounded by the masters. So very often we invited on the stage as a featured guest musicians like Derya Türkan or Kutsi Ergun or Bora Uymaz or Nejat Çelik sometimes also. And
mm,
even though this ensemble is for now a little bit on hold because many of the musicians they are now in several parts of the world, which makes it
mm,
very difficult for us to deal with the logistics. The singer
yeah,
is in America, the canon player is in another country, the violin player is in France. But it's still an ensemble that keeps on being very important for me, and we are kind of waiting for the opportunity once in an all not too distant future
yeah,
to team up again and to continue playing music together. So it's like a long term ensemble that for now is a bit on standby, but it might all come back soon. Who knows? Yeah.
interesting, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, all the best. So,
Thank
Tristan,
you.
how can you be reached out? What are the channels that make people who wants to collaborate or maybe look for projects or maybe ask you for lessons or whatever, if you would accept either in
I
person
think
or
I think
online?
I think the social media are doing the job basically. I have a website
Yeah.
also,
Mm,
a website that presents like an overview of what I'm doing. But of course, a website is
mm,
always very difficult because sometimes you cannot really give the whole picture of who you want to be or how you can present yourself through a website. It's a
yeah.
whole art to write a biography that is
Yeah.
presenting all the aspects of yourself. So I basically think it's also by being around and by being active within the community, within the network of the music that we're playing.
Mm,
Um, After concerts, for example, very often somebody would come up and tell me, "Are you giving lessons?" For example. So I think it's thanks to the fact that we are spreading our music through
mhm,
concerts and through sometimes seminars also or interviews that people come to know me
mm,
and other musicians like me.
mm,
So yeah, it's basically this is the first answer that comes to my mind.
mm.
Um, I'm not
And
really
social media.
promoting so much to myself. I'm more navigating on what reveals itself
Mm,
spontaneously And you know, after a while, you're just into the running. You give a concert, and then some organizer sees you and wants to schedule you for a concert somewhere in the future. So it's basically the way it works, I think. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Tristan, this was really a great time and a great discussion with you. I'm really
It
happy
was
that
the
we
pleasure
had.
was all mine. I cannot tell you enough. I
Yeah,
think you're doing tremendous job hosting all these people that have so much to say also, and it's a pleasure also to listen to fellow musicians and to hear their witnesses and their experiences. So I'm very happy that you're keeping on doing this job and this project. It's very relevant and significant. So the pleasure is all mine. Absolutely.
yeah, thank
Yeah.
you very much. And I think we will meet soon for that next discussion. I don't say the last discussion. It will be the
With
next
pleasure.
because things will evolve and things will come up. And Nadi is for all
Yeah,
of us when we are an Nadi, you know. Whoever comes in does not get out.
absolutely. It's
Yeah,
something to look forward to. Yeah, sure, sure.
interesting. But before we say goodbye to our viewers, what would you suggest to share? Like, let's have some kind of recording or something
Ah,
from
yes.
your
I
yeah
can
work.
I can maybe, since I mentioned also this this concept or this type of music of contemporary modal music,
Mm,
the earlier on in the interview I proposed to you to show a taksim, a very
mhm,
classical Ottoman taksim. And then we had another very classical Turkish piece, like a Karjar Köçekçiler, played by the Lamekan Ensemble. And now I might want to propose a more free and open piece that is a
mm.
little bit more loosely based on makam, and it's also featuring different elements from different cultures. So
Mm.
I'm happy to show this part too. And this is a recording played by the Solman Sextet with the people that I mentioned before, great musicians on
Perfect,
with ney, cello, percussion, and oud. Yes.
perfect. We'll listen to it, but before that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for hosting me.